Welcome, everyone, this is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku Declared War on the World. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Going back in time to reclaim your past body is probably as pleasant as it sounds, which is to say, it isn't pleasant at all. Izuku thinks it must feel remarkably similar to being hit full force by a tsunami. He's left dizzy and out of breath, his ears roaring and his blood thrumming. The world spinning head over heels as Izuku tries his best to not throw up and to remember how to breathe. He comes back to himself on the floor, body trembling with aftershocks, panting between clenched teeth as his stomach rolls. Izuku's ears are buzzing, his fingers and toes are numb. He doesn't know where he is. He doesn't know when he is. What's wrong with Deku? A young voice asks, high-pitched and mocking. Maybe his primitive physiology is finally killing him, someone else says. There's a reason most quirkless people have died off by now, you know. Something harshly jabs at Izuku's back. He realizes, somewhat distantly, that it's the toes of a person's shoe. Don't touch him, the first voice hisses. What? Someone laughs. You still think that uselessness is contagious? No, the girl says, it's a bad omen to touch a quirkless person. Don't you know? My mom told me. Whatever, a boy scoffs, before another shoe kicks at Izuku's curled form. Doesn't matter. Let's go before we're late to class. Izuku keeps his eyes squeezed shut, listening as their footsteps fade away. He lays there and relearns how to breathe. And when he thinks he can open his eyes without throwing up, he does. He's greeted by off-white walls and yellow-stained tiled floors. Aldera, Izuku says as the bell rings overhead, making his vision waver and his head pound. He closes his eyes for a moment, letting his forehead thunk to the floor. Good. That's good. If Izuku is at his junior high, that means he must have gone far enough back. Now to just figure out exactly how far that is. Izuku presses himself up, catching sight of his yellow backpack crumpled beside him, where he must have dropped it. He gives it a nostalgic once-over before he throws it on, feeling a little off balance. Okay, time for some recon. It doesn't matter that it's the middle of a school day or that Izuku is technically skipping classes. He needs to start planning, and to do that, he needs information. Izuku heads for the roof. He remembers Aldera's lack of security and the way the rooftop door was always unlocked. It'll be easier to leave from there than to try walking out the front doors. Izuku remembers a time when he was actually young enough to go to this school, how he would sneak up to the rooftop to hide from bullies so he could eat his lunch in peace. He remembers being caught once, how the janitor had seen Izuku going to the rooftop after hours, and instead of stopping him, instead of asking why a 13-year-old boy would be going up to a rooftop by himself, he turned away from Izuku and left without saying a word. Izuku absolutely hates this place. Halfway up the stairs, Izuku throws caution to the wind and starts sprinting up the steps, his footsteps bouncing up the stairwell and echoing off the walls. His heart is racing in his chest. He feels out of breath and spellbound with the repercussions of what he's just done, of what they've just accomplished. By the time he reaches the roof access door, Izuku is feeling almost frantic, his skin buzzing and his ears ringing. The door slams open under his jittery hands, cracking the cement wall, but Izuku hardly notices. Because the next moment, he's running, letting One for All race up his legs as he leaps off the rooftop of his old middle school. Izuku doesn't even have a destination in mind when he starts running. He takes in the whole and thriving city around him, the lack of decay and rubble, the color and vibrancy, the life. The way that civilians bustle around each other, bumping elbows and trading words, walking and talking, unaware of what waits for them in the shadows. Izuku's hindbrain takes over as he runs, yellow backpack jarring into his ribs, lungs burning in his chest. He winds the streets and tries not to feel overwhelmed at the sight of breathing, happy, vulnerable, living, defenseless, innocent, alive, people all around him. It isn't exactly surprising when he ends up on Dagoba Beach. For some reason, however, it does catch Izuku off guard when instead of coming up to a clear expanse of sand, ocean, and sky, all he can see is trash and garbage, a junkyard that Izuku remembers cleaning up with his own two hands. Izuku climbs into the rubble without hesitation, jumping over piles of trash and scaling over mountains of garbage. And then Izuku sinks down into the sand, hidden behind an overturned refrigerator and a burned-out husk of a car. He digs through his backpack for his phone, pulling up the calendar with numb, trembling fingers. 4 years. Izuku has traveled back 4 years in time, which means he is 14 right now, over a month away from the sludge villain incident and his first meeting with All Might. Almost a full year from the entrance exam into UA. Izuku breathes in a breath that tastes more of garbage than salt water. He's trembling all over, elated and relieved, exhausted and wary, overjoyed and terrified. But under it all, so thankful to have this second chance. "I'll save you," Izuku whispers to no one, whispers to everyone. He hunches over himself, presses his knees into his folded arms, curling his hands against his chest. "It will be all right," he murmurs against the wind, "because I am here." Izuku ends up sitting on the beach until the sun is sinking below the horizon in yellow-pink rays, and the breeze coming off the waves has left him chilled and shivering. He had pulled out his hero analysis for the future 13 feet hours ago and started jotting down half-formed plans and ideas. Frantic and half-hysterical as he sat there in the trash and sand. He drew up a timeline of all the major events, noting down anything he could remember. Trying to recall every blood-soaked, fear-drenched detail, so he could prevent them from happening this time around. The notebook is mostly filled now, and Izuku's right hand is cramped and aching. The League of Villains needs to be taken out before they can gain any sort of support or traction. Once they start making an army of Nomu to unleash on the heroes. Once the Doctor starts on quirk replication. Once they start kidnapping heroes and using them against their former allies, that's when there is no going back. Izuku can't let it get that far. The USJ was their first encounter. Izuku remembers it clearly, so many battles ago, but still stark in his memory, the League's debut. It was one of the only instances where Shigaraki was vulnerable enough for Izuku to reach. They got smarter after that. Shigaraki stayed in the shadows and bided his time, planning and waiting for the prime opportunity to strike. The USJ is Izuku's best option for nabbing Shigaraki. Otherwise, he'll have to throw the timeline to the wind and take some drastic measures in order to take down the League. The idea of having to wait a year before he can make a move on Shigaraki leaves Izuku feeling dizzy and sick with apprehension and despondency. But he doesn't actually know where All for One or Shigaraki are right now, and he doesn't want to disrupt the timeline too soon and throw off future events before he absolutely has to. Izuku needs to be smart about this. He needs to plan carefully. He needs to be methodical and tactful. He needs to be patient. This is their second chance. There will not be a third. In the midst of everything, the unsurmountable relief that their plan worked. The discomfort that came with being in his 14-year-old body again. The terrifying realization that he was back in time all alone, and he would have to face the League by himself. Between all of that, Izuku forgot. He forgot that his mom would be at home, waiting for him. Izuku walks through the door, and Izuku feels the breath punch out of his lungs. He staggers in the doorway for a moment, has to grab the doorframe for support as his legs threaten to buckle from under him. Fingers cracking at dry wall, eyes stinging and heart pounding. Izuku should have prepared himself for this, but he was distracted, and he had forgotten. His mom is here. God, he's missed his mom so much. Izuku, she calls again, concerned this time, and that breaks Izuku out of his frozen stupor. He stumbles down the hall and into the kitchen. The smell of cooking rice and steaming vegetables thick in the air. And there she is, wrapped in her favorite apron, her hair thrown up into a bun, looking at Izuku with big, worried eyes. Izuku might be a survivor of war and genocide, a seasoned hero with multiple quirks under his skin and scars over the top. But he can't help it when the tears spill over at the sight of his mama, here and alive in front of him. Izuku, she cries, dashing forward to anxiously grab at him. Izuku intercepts her before she can begin checking him over for bumps or bruises. He wraps his arms around her and pulls her in, holding his mom tightly to his chest and pressing his face into her shoulder. Izuku, she asks worriedly, hands petting at his hair and back, trying to soothe him. Sweetie, what's going on? What's wrong? Izuku shakes his head, his chest hitching with the sobs he's suppressing. And nothing's wrong. I just came back from the future. Just haven't seen you for nearly 2 years? Just forgot that you would be here and alive? I've just had an overwhelming day, Izuku finally chokes out. Which is true, which is so irrefutably, undeniably true, but it still tastes like a lie leaving his lips. "Oh, honey," his mom coos, and then she's squeezing him back, holding onto him with the same force he's clinging to her. Izuku chokes on a noise he didn't know he could make. I love you so much. You know that, right?" he asks, because he wants her to know. He has to make sure she knows. Because he never got to make sure before. Before it was too late, before she was gone. "That I love you." His mom makes a confused and watery sound in his ear, but her voice is strong when she replies. "Yes, I know. I know." She pulls away slightly, her hands coming up to cup both of Izuku's cheeks so she can look him in the eye. "And I love you too, Izuku." She brushes his tears away even as her own roll down her cheeks. "You've always had all my love, sweetheart." Izuku squeezes his eyes shut, aching so deeply inside of himself that he can't remember how to breathe for a moment. His mom holds him through it, running her hands through his hair and whispering little reassurances in his ear. Until Izuku pulls away just enough to move the burning vegetables off the stove before they can catch fire. When Izuku glances back to his mom, she still looks anxious and concerned, hands fluttering around like she wants to reach out to Izuku and hold him again. Izuku takes one of her hands in his own, lacing their fingers together. Even now, in his 14-year-old body, his hands are bigger than hers, his fingers longer. He wonders, in the back of his mind, what she would think of him, if she knew, if she could see him for the man, the hero, he grew to be. She didn't get the chance to see him grow up the first time around. Izuku wonders if she still would have found it in herself to be proud, even with knowing he failed. Can we take a day?" he asks, chewing on his lip as he tries to rein all his broken pieces back in. "Can we just take a day tomorrow? No work. No school. Just one day, you and me?" His mom stares at him for a moment, gaze searching and coming up with even more questions. Izuku can see it, the way that she wants to ask, wants to know what's going on. But instead, because his mama has always known when to push and when to let things go, she agrees tentatively, her other hand coming up to tuck some of Izuku's stray curls behind his ear. "All right," she says, we can do that." Izuku leans in to wrap her up into another hug, wishing that he was wider, that he was taller, that he was bigger and stronger, that he was his whole entire self. "Thank you," he says, biting back all the other words he wants to say. Izuku and his mom stay in the next day. They wake up late and don't bother to change out of their pajamas. They end up curled together on the couch as they marathon All Might movies. Popcorn and takeaway cartons littering their coffee table. The day leaves Izuku feeling safe and content and warm. He sits there for a while, his mom asleep on his shoulder, the muted sounds of one of his favorite movies playing in the background, and Izuku ponders. He tries to remember the last time he felt safe in his own skin, the last time he wasn't on high alert, the last time he fell asleep without wondering what was hiding in the dark. He comes up blank. He wonders how long he can make this feeling last. 3 weeks later, in the lamplight of his childhood bedroom, Izuku makes a decision. The clock is slowly crawling toward 4 a.m., and Izuku has to be up for school in a mere 3 hours. But that feels like a far-off, distant thing in comparison to everything else Izuku is facing. He sat curled up on his bed, stacks of papers and pens littered across his bright sheets, staring up at the All Might posters hung on his walls, feeling a resigned sort of determination filling up his chest. He has a new notebook filled with plans and strategies, and contingencies if all else fails. It's written in a code that perhaps only Nezu himself could break. Though Izuku doubts anyone will raid a 14-year-old's notebook in the hopes of finding a systematic takedown of an unknown villain organization. He has plans and backup plans for his backup plans. He's been going over it all for weeks now, trying to take into account every variable, to think in every convoluted and abstract way imaginable, so he won't miss a single possibility. Izuku needs to cover all his bases, to prepare for every option, to consider every detail. Nothing can be left to chance. Except, well, there is always a chance, isn't there? A chance that this was all for nothing. A chance that Izuku will fail. A chance that Izuku will die. So, contingencies. When Izuku went back in time, he took all of his quirks with him, including, of course, One for All. Even if his current body lacks the muscle tone and stamina he built up over the years, it still remembers how to use One for All. and Izuku is working on gaining that muscle and strength back. Dagoba Beach is already showing the results of his rigorous training. The point is, Izuku already has one for all. Right now, All Might is searching for a worthy successor to pass his quirk down to. In 15 days, he is supposed to meet a quirkless boy by chance, and choose him as said successor. Izuku has to make sure that does not happen. If Izuku and Toshinori never meet under that bridge, if Izuku never gets attacked by the sludge villain, if he never saves Kacchan and impresses All Might, then he does not receive one for all. Instead, All Might would meet with Sir Night-Eye like he was supposed to, all those years ago. He would be introduced to Sir Night-Eye's latest intern, a bright and courageous young hero who hopes to save 1,000,000 people one day. And most likely, Toshinori would pass one for all down to Mirio and begin training him as his new successor. This is what Izuku needs to happen. It kills him inside, thinking about giving up that relationship with All Might, with Toshinori. To never have that bond with him. To not have him there, in Izuku's corner. There, by Izuku's side, until the end. But if Izuku can live through the loss of the man once, he can do so again, no matter how much it hurts. Lemillion will end to All Might, and a wonderful symbol of peace. He was an amazing hero and friend in Izuku's time. And maybe with one for all coursing through his veins, Mirio will live long enough to save 1,000,000 people like he always dreamed of. This way, if Izuku can't make good on his promises, if Izuku fails once again, if he dies along the way, then one for all does not die with him. This way, Izuku will have left the world with a fighting chance. Izuku stares down at his scarless hands, watching the flickering light of one for all dancing along his skin. And then he looks up at the face of his once mentor smiling down at him, and Izuku makes a choice. "I'm sorry," Izuku says, feeling raw and ripped open, and so very tired. "I'm sorry," he says again, tears blurring the image of All Might into a kaleidoscope of colors. "I'll never stop being sorry." Izuku wouldn't say he settles into his new routine, more like, he drifts through it in a numb sort of detachment. It's harder than he thought it would be, pretending to be a kid again, to put on a face day in and day out. It's tiring in a way that Izuku hadn't been expecting. Every moment he isn't in school, Izuku uses either to train rigorously or to agonize over his plans. He finds himself lying awake at night, staring up at the ceiling, either plagued by nightmares of his past, soon-to-be future, if he isn't careful, or with his mind racing with anxieties and possibilities. His thoughts drift during class, caught in the monotony of junior high and the escalating sleep deprivation. If his teachers cared about the quirkless kid in the back, they might have called Izuku out on his lack of participation. But now that Izuku doesn't bring his notebooks to school and his muttering habit has seemingly disappeared, they tend to leave him alone as long as Izuku stays in his lane and doesn't get in anyone else's way. The kids, on the other hand, are just as vicious as Izuku remembers. Izuku is good at blending into the shadows and disappearing into the crowd, something he was skillful at even as an actual 14-year-old. And though Izuku can avoid most physical confrontation, there are times that he is cornered, and he has to sit and take it, pretending that he can't fight back. But Izuku can take physical pain. That was something he learned back in his childhood and something that carried him through many battles. Izuku can deal with cuts and bruises. What is harder to ignore, however, are the words. Useless. Good for nothing. Null. Worthless. Waste of space. Genless. Deku. That's another thing Izuku hadn't been expecting. The clench of his chest and the twist in his gut that came with hearing his hero name uttered with such contempt. The way his throat closes up whenever the name is used here. Always said with disgust and hatred. Like a curse or a disease, something to be ashamed of. Deku hasn't been any one of those things in years. Izuku took back the name, Deku, and made it his own, rebranded it and gave it a new meaning. Deku was something to be proud of. Deku was a hero. Deku was hope. But here, that Deku doesn't exist. Here, Deku is nothing. Izuku doesn't know when, exactly, he began sneaking up to the roof to spend his lunch periods alone. But he's not even been back at Aldera for a full month yet, and it seems he's already fallen into past habits and old coping mechanisms. Izuku has fought in one of the bloodiest and cruelest wars to have ever plagued the world. He's watched helplessly as hero society crumbled before them, and as nations toppled soon after. Izuku has seen people torn apart by monsters, and he has held friends as the light bled out from their eyes. Izuku has been through horrible, unspeakable things. And yet, here Izuku is, sneaking to the rooftop of his middle school, just like he did as a kid. So he won't have to hear the mocking jeers or whispered insults of his classmates. Hiding from the name Deku, Izuku scoffs at himself, kicking his feet lightly where they hang off the ledge, his heels scuffing against the wall. He wonders what his friends would think of him, if they saw him now sleep-deprived and anxiety-ridden, lips bitten raw and muscles aching. Wrapped up in the blacks of Aldera and a deceptively childish face. The fate of the entire world and a few discriminatory words weighing him down. Except, well, even in such a self-deprecating mood, Izuku knows his friends, and he can't imagine them being anything but supportive and understanding. Tenya would help Izuku to either take his mind off of things or try his best to lighten Izuku's load. Ochako would wrap Izuku in a hug before she went to go threaten those bothering him. Never mind the fact that they are 14-year-olds. Hitoshi would tell him to quit it with the self-flagellation already, and then probably go help Ochako scare a bunch of 8th graders. And Shoto would come and just sit quietly with Izuku up here on this ledge, sharing in his company and silent support. But they aren't here. And well, that's the real problem, isn't it? Izuku looks up to the blue sky, blinking bright glittering sunspots from his eyes. A cold breeze plays with his hair, blows at his clothes, urging him toward the edge. I forgot what it was like to be alone, Izuku realizes with a jolt. Too many emotions to name colliding in his chest, longing and sadness, regret and loneliness, anger and guilt. But the most striking of them all is the sharp-edged blade of grief that hits him full force in the center of his chest. Strong enough to knock the air straight from Izuku's lungs, to leave him dizzy and gasping for breath. Izuku presses one hand to his heaving chest, the other clutches at the ledge of the building, trying to keep his balance, keep his bearings. He hunches over himself, half bent over his knees and struggling for air. He starts, but chokes on the words, his vision gone blurry and spotted. I don't know how I'm supposed to do this without you, he admits, wishing, wanting, needing someone here by his side. How am I? Izuku starts, breath shuddering out of him, voice wavering with each word. What if I'm not strong enough or quick enough or smart enough? Izuku asks. What if it happens again? What if I let it happen again? Izuku whispers, hand pressed over his quivering mouth. What if I can't do this on my own? The icy wind whips at Izuku's face, cooling the tears on his cheeks, and blowing his hair into his eyes. He blinks against it, wrapping his arms around himself and trying to remember how to breathe. What if I fail again? Only a month into his new training plan, and already Dagoba Beach is starting to show Izuku's hard work. At the rate he's going, Izuku will be done cleaning it up in half the time it took him the first go around. Of course this time he has both muscle memory and various quirks under his skin to make the process easier. Though he is doing most of the heavy lifting quirkless, being that the whole point of this is to gain back the muscle and stamina that his body forgot. So while most things are easier this time around, other things are much, much harder. Izuku can't seem to stop glancing over his shoulder, looking for someone who is not there. He catches himself talking to thin air, waiting for an answer that will not come. His eyes flit about, searching for a head of blonde hair and a beaming smile, only to remember after a shocked moment, that he is alone. Izuku grits his teeth, shaking his head at himself and blinking the past out of his eyes. Damn it, he hisses, jumping down from his perch on a stack of old tires. Izuku paces back and forth on the sand, running jittery hands through his tangled hair. Izuku lets out a shout, and with an angry burst of one for all he kicks at a rusted carburetor, watching as it flies forward and skitters over the water like force sinking to the bottom of the sea. Izuku huffs a breath at himself, scrubbing a hand over his face before he scoops up his backpack and makes his way toward the stairs leading down to the beach. He can't concentrate when he's like this, and yelling and throwing things isn't going to do anything but draw unwanted attention. Izuku practically collapses down onto the steps, bag thumping against his shins. He pulls out his bento box, angrily popping some onigiri into his mouth as he glares out at the ocean. He feels caught between time. Like the memories have been twisted up and jumbled inside of him, and Izuku's mind can't make sense of them. There is the part of him that is constantly reminding himself that his version of Toshinori is gone. That it's stupid to get caught looking over his shoulder for a man long dead. But then there is the other part of him that whispers that All Might is out there right now, alive and breathing and still fighting. And that same traitorous part of him keeps wondering why it is, if Toshinori is alive, that he isn't here by Izuku's side. Because he is not yours and you are not his, Izuku has to remind himself, because he doesn't know you, and if things go right, then he may never need to know you. Izuku hisses through his teeth as he bites into the palm of his hand, his eyes stinging and his skin burning. He stares out into the waves, glittering in the rays of the lowering sun. This was his starting ground, this illegal trash heap of a beach. But it had never felt as much like a chore as it does now, and it had never, ever felt this lonely. Ever since Izuku made his decision to not meet Toshinori this time around, he's been second-guessing himself. Wondering if he's making the right choice, if he won't end up regretting it later. And the thing is, Izuku knows he will regret it, because he's already dreading it now. But at the same time, Izuku knows. He knows that it's the right thing to do. The smart thing, the only thing he can do. But he still hates it, and he hates every hour that brings him nearer to the day he will be on an intersecting path with Toshinori. And instead of meeting him halfway, Izuku will have to force himself to turn and walk away. That's not the whole of it though, because when Izuku is being honest with himself, he knows what is really bothering him. And that is that Toshinori, his Toshinori, is gone. He's gone, and there is nothing that Izuku can do about it. Even if he did throw his meticulously thought-out plan to the wind, even if Izuku went out and found Toshinori right this very second, he wouldn't know Izuku, he wouldn't remember him. All their shared history, everything that they lived through together, everything they fought for at each other's side. Izuku can't get that back, and part of him doesn't even want to. Because it was all of that, their time with one another, their shared timeline, their years spent together, that lead to All Might's death. It's a no-win scenario, and Izuku has gone through enough no-win scenarios to know that they never get easier to live through. Izuku angles his head up toward the sky, closing his eyes as he lets the sun heat up his face. Everything is not all right, he murmurs, voice getting lost to the waves and wind, because you are not here. Kachan's palm singes the material of Izuku's school uniform, making a puff of smoke rise up and sting at his eyes. He can feel the heat of it sinking into his shoulder, leaving small blisters behind. But Izuku doesn't flinch away, not from Kachan. It's been difficult to be around Kachan these past few weeks. Hard to brush off his words and to pretend the way he treats Izuku doesn't hurt. He still remembers the grown version of his friend, the Kachan that helped push Izuku past his limits. The Kachan that grew and became the hero Izuku always knew he could be. The Kachan that held him after they lost Ochako. The Kachan that Izuku left behind when he came back to the past. He misses Kachan. But Kachan is right here. Here's a little word of advice, nerd, he says, hand still burning Izuku's shoulder. Don't even think of applying to UA, got it? He lets go of Izuku then, walking away as the two other boys mock Izuku from the sidelines. Izuku stands there, waiting, because he knows what comes next. You know, if you really want to be a hero that badly, there's a quick way to do it, Kachan says, and Izuku closes his eyes against the words he knows by heart. Believe that you'll be born with a quirk in your next life, and take a swan dive off the roof. In the previous timeline, Izuku had tried to stand up for himself, incensed and bitter on his own behalf. But he was too scared to stand his ground, intimidated by Kachan and his hot temper and even hotter hands. This time, however, he doesn't let it go. What if I did? He asks, voice just above a whisper, but not wavering in the slightest. Huh? Kachan's voice comes from the doorway, but Izuku isn't facing him. He's staring out the classroom's windows, hands hung loosely at his sides. What if I did jump? Izuku asks, what if I did kill myself? At this, Izuku turns slightly, looking at Kachan over his smoldering shoulder. Would you be a hero then? What did you just say to me? Kachan seethes, stomping forward a couple steps, sparks popping from his palms. But Izuku is not intimidated. He is 18 years old and has faced down far greater threats than the angry adolescent version of his childhood friend. Izuku is teaching a lesson here. He is making a point, one that he hopes gets through his friend's thick skull. Izuku strolls over to the open window, the one that Kachan had thrown his notebook out of in the previous timeline. Though Izuku no longer brings his notebooks to school, too aware of the sensitive information they hold. Izuku pushes the window open wide, glancing down the 3 stories to the ground far below. Heroes are meant to make people feel safe. They're meant to help the helpless. Izuku locks eyes with Kachan, green meeting red. To protect the ones who can't protect themselves. Izuku lifts himself up onto the sill, his legs dangling outside the window. He hears twin gasps from behind him, hears Kachan rushing forward, shoving desks and chairs out of his way as he half snarls, half chokes, "Deku. What kind of hero do you want to be, Kachan?" Izuku asks, and then he lets himself drop. He hears Kachan yell out from behind him, but Izuku's already falling, wind whipping at his clothes and snatching at his backpack. He uses float right before he can hit the ground, and then Izuku is running, one for all buzzing along his skin as he dashes down the street. Izuku hops over the koi pond and dodges around the gate, his heart racing and his thoughts spinning too quickly for him to grab onto. He knows he'll pay for that stunt tomorrow, that there's no way Kachan is going to let something like that go. But Izuku couldn't pass up the opportunity to knock some sense into his friend. His backpack jars into his ribs as Izuku runs, his shoes slapping against the concrete as Izuku pushes himself to go faster. The adrenaline of doing something so risky has him buzzing. Izuku almost heads straight for the beach, where he can get out some of his pent-up energy. But he doesn't want to ruin his uniform, and his mom will be. "Oh," Izuku gasps, coming to an abrupt stop so quickly he actually stumbles. "Oh, no," he mumbles, staring up at the very familiar underpass. I'm not supposed to be here." He had forgotten in his haste to teach Kachan a lesson and get away from the school. It had been on his mind all week, every hour of every day. Izuku could feel the countdown like a physical weight pressing down on him. He can't believe he'd forgotten, even for a moment. Today is the day of the sludge villain attack. Today is the day Izuku meets All Might, to changes Izuku's life forever. Today is the day that started it all. Today is. Izuku swallows dryly against the lump in his throat. The adrenaline from before is fading, and Izuku is left cold and floundering without it, stuck between what he wants to do for himself, and what he needs to do for the world. He stands there for another long moment, knees locked and lungs burning, mourning. Mourning for what he used to have. Mourning for what he is about to lose. Mourning because he knows nothing will ever be the same again. Izuku presses a trembling fist to his mouth and lets out a strangled sob, tears stinging hotly at his eyes. "I'm sorry, Toshinori," he whispers into the echoing tunnel, and then, before he can second-guess himself again, Izuku turns away and runs. Izuku paces back and forth on the beach, as he's been doing for hours now. Long past when All Might must have been pursuing the sludge villain. Long enough that the chances of Izuku running into them have passed. Even longer still, from that one life-altering moment. His mom must be getting worried, Izuku knows distantly. It's well past dark, and Izuku's stomach is cramping with hunger pains. He should go home, apologize to his mother, and try to eat a few bites of food. Move on from this day of bad memories and excruciating choices. But the thought of heading home and having to act normal is almost as nauseating as the situation itself. Running jittery hands through his tangled hair and taking a breath, Izuku tries to pull himself together. But he can't seem to rein himself in any more than he can ignore his shot nerves or frayed emotions, and no amount of time or determination can make the grief in his heart easier to bear. Izuku pauses, his hands fisted at his sides, fingernails biting into his palms. Suddenly, it isn't sadness or desperation or even terror that he feels, it's anger. Raw, unadulterated rage. It washes over him so quickly it's all Izuku can do not to choke on it. The burning hot feeling of resentment, the thick coiling feeling of confinement, come out of hiding from somewhere deep inside of him. Mixing together and building inside of Izuku, until it becomes too much for him to hold inside. And then Izuku is screaming, something rageful and agonized and bleeding. It is not a cry of sorrow or fear, but something of pure, unyielding pain. Even to Izuku's own ears, it sounds like a call for vengeance, a bay for blood. The stench of garbage is far more tolerable than the bitter vitriol pouring out of his mouth. But Izuku can't find it in himself to care, can't make himself stop. Let the world hear his rage, let it bear the weight of his pain, because it is this world that has taken so much from Izuku. And it is this world that has placed an insurmountable weight on his shoulders. And it is this world that has demanded that he did again, but this time, that he does so alone. Izuku screams until he is lost for breath, and then he screams some more. Destiny is a funny thing. It is not as solid as people would have you think. It is fluid and ever-changing. There is no fate, no set path, no script written in the stars. Destiny is a choice. Izuku used to think his destiny was to be All Might's successor, to become the new symbol of peace, to stand in the way of evil. And he did all those things. He fought against evil, and he followed in All Might's footsteps. And where he could not be a symbol of peace, he became a symbol of hope, instead. Izuku fulfilled those destinies, but he has a new one now. Izuku is going to save the world, or he'll die trying. Izuku has a myriad of quirks to choose from when it comes to picking out the one he will use for his quirk registration form. The problem, however, is trying to choose which one he wants to represent to UA. There are certain quirks Izuku, of course, cannot use in front of any of the UA staff or students without major suspicion arising. Then there were a few other quirks that Izuku eventually crossed off his list of candidates. So that leaves him with 8 quirks to choose from. Fa Jin is a very good offensive ability, and Izuku would succeed while using it. But he's so used to pairing it up with One for All, he isn't sure he wouldn't accidentally slip up and use both at the same time. Danger Sense is a useful quirk, and one that has saved Izuku's life countless times. But he likes to keep that one in his back pocket. Better for no one to know he can sense a blow before it can land. Shelter is a very powerful quirk. Being able to make force fields to protect himself and others has saved Izuku and his friends over and over again. Without it, Izuku knows he'd be dead 10 times over. But Shelter has no offensive capabilities, it is purely a defensive quirk. Smokescreen is much the same. It works well for espionage and covert missions, and for escaping enemies. But it would be hard to get into UA with only smoke on his side. Mirage is out for the same reason. While being able to make illusions of himself has been very useful at distracting enemies, it is not an offensive quirk. Izuku's clones aren't actually physical, they cannot talk or touch anything, so not very helpful in a fight. Aoi Anu is the complete opposite. Fire is an extremely useful ability to have in battle. But Izuku still has trouble controlling the quirk, and he would hesitate to use the ability while in the same class as Shoto. Float is another quirk Izuku has become reliant on. Being able to use aerial attacks on enemies or evacuate civilians through the air has been quite literally life-saving. Float is integral to Izuku's current fighting style. But without the strength enhancements to launch himself through the air, would Float be as useful? There is a possibility that Izuku could use another quirk in combination with Float to make it more battle-capable. But no, he shouldn't risk that, not with so many eyes on him. That leaves Izuku with one option. Black Whip. Izuku lets some of the black tendrils curl out from his arms, watching the way they move and shift as he breathes. He's been training with Black Whip for years now. He remembers after he first got it, sitting down with Fumikage and learning how to meditate, how to rein in his emotions and control them. Black Whip had been frightening at first, most of all probably because of how Izuku got it. But now, years after its first manifestation, Black Whip just feels like an old friend. Izuku picks up his pen, lets out a breath, and finishes filling out his form. When Izuku walks through the gates of UA, he can't help it when he falters. He stares up at the wide, gleaming expanse of his old school, and tries his best not to drown under the sudden influx of memories. It's an overwhelming flood of feelings and emotions inside Izuku's brain, tangling up Izuku's thoughts and leaving him floundering and breathless. Izuku chokes on the memories for a moment, trying not to gag against them. Because, for a single heartbeat, just a fraction of a second, when Izuku looks up at UA, all he can see is a shattered husk of a building looming in the sky, with black soot and red blood staining its walls. He can still taste the ash on his tongue, can smell the sulfur staining the air. Izuku blinks, and suddenly, he's back in time, staring up at the remains of UA. Their last true defense, up in flames and half collapsed, sparks and dust drifting up into the starlit sky. The silence somehow far more damning than a scream could have ever been. All gone. All gone. It's all gone. Out of my way, Deku, a familiar voice suddenly sneers from behind him. Izuku flinches as he's sharply yanked out of his memories. He breathes out a stuttering exhale, the tips of his fingers tingling, his head buzzing. Izuku blinks the nightmare away and pushes all of his hurts back under his skin where they belong. He needs to get his head on straight, he needs to pull himself together. "Good morning, Ka-chan," he replies, inclining his head in a polite nod. Ka-chan doesn't spare him a passing glance. "Get out of my way, before I set you on fire." Izuku smirks, lips quirking up just the slightest bit. Now this he can deal with. This is familiar. "I'm sure the teachers here at UA would love to see that," he says lowly. "And then, good luck on the exam, Katsuki." Izuku walks away before Ka-chan can reply, but he catches sight of the other boy's face. The irritation and confusion that's pulling at his mouth and shadowing his eyes, the scowl that sets into the contours of his face. Irritation and confusion have pretty much been Ka-chan's default response to Izuku these past 11 months. Though that's probably warranted, Izuku growing a backbone and some self-confidence, seemingly overnight, had to come as a shock to everyone at Aldera, most of all Ka-chan. He stopped harassing Izuku quite as much after the window stunt he pulled. Though, in those moments where Ka-chan's temper did reach a boiling point and Izuku was within the same vicinity, Izuku was either very good at disappearing, or very good at dodging. Izuku could see it in random moments throughout this past year. The way that Ka-chan has been watching him, how his eyes will linger a little bit too long, how he seems to be searching for something in those stolen glances at Izuku. Ka-chan is smart and observant, perhaps he's not at the same level as Izuku himself. But even at this age, Ka-chan's instincts and intellect are nothing to scoff at. He knows that something is wrong with Izuku, that much is certain. Izuku's just waiting for the day Ka-chan's curiosity finally outweighs his pride and he demands answers. Izuku feels more grounded in the present now, after his interaction with Ka-chan. He finds himself thankful to the other boy for snapping him out of it. If Ka-chan hadn't interrupted Izuku's spiraling thoughts, Izuku isn't sure he would have been able to unglue his feet from the entrance gate. Which is, well, ridiculous, really. There is no choice here, there is no other option. Izuku needs to get into UA, he needs to join the hero course so he can defeat the League, so he can protect his friends, so he can save his family. Izuku pulls in a deep breath and rolls his shoulders back, lifting his head and standing tall. "I can do this," he mutters to himself, finding his resolve. "I have to do this." "Wow," a voice chimes in from his left. "You sure are confident. I wish I felt the same way, I'm pretty nervous." Izuku freezes, his determined smile catching on his face as butterflies burst in his stomach and flutter up to his chest. Everything in him stops as he turns to see brown hair, and rosy cheeks, and a soft smile aimed his way. The sight of Ochako almost knocks the air straight from Izuku's lungs. He tried his best to prepare himself for today, not wanting a repeat of what happened when he first saw his mom. But it's different in the actual moment, suddenly coming face to face with the younger version of one of his best friends. It physically hurts, not being allowed to lunge for Ochako and pull her in. To wrap his arms around her and hold onto her with all his might. Izuku's chest is tight, his eyes burn, he wants nothing more than to give Ochako a hug. But instead, because Ochako does not know him here, because Izuku is not a child, though he feels like one in this moment. Because Izuku is a hero and he has a job to do. Izuku puts a smile on his face and says, "Don't be fooled. My confidence isn't as unwavering as I'd like it to be." A bright smile, eyes crinkling and cheeks dimpling as she laughs. "It's pretty nerve-wracking, isn't it? Just the building itself is intimidating." Izuku nods, pulling open the door for her before he follows close behind. Suddenly his nerves about returning to UA feel small and distant. Though maybe that isn't all that surprising, Ochako has always been able to give Izuku a boost of courage whenever he's needed it. "God, he's missed her so much. We could walk together, if you want," he offers, almost desperately hoping she doesn't turn him away. To be here, talking to her again. To hear her voice, even if it's higher pitched. Even if she's younger, with baby fat still in her cheeks and innocence still lacing her eyes. To have her here, standing right in front of him. It leaves Izuku feeling like he's floating, like he's flying, like he's dreaming. "Sure," Ochako chirps, bouncing on the toes of her shoes. She throws Izuku a glance before she reaches between them, hand extended. "I'm Uraraka Ochako, by the way," she introduces herself. "It's nice to meet you." Izuku takes her hand, and it feels like an old memory and a new beginning all at the same time. For a moment Izuku wonders what Ochako would think, how she would react if she knew. If she knew that the last time Izuku was with her, she was bleeding out in his arms. If she knew that the last time he talked to her, she was breathless and dying and staring up at Izuku like he was their only hope. If she knew that the last time he touched her, he had pressed his fingers into her skin and taken her quirk from her. Please, Deku, Izuku-kun, please, take it. Take my quirk. Before it's too late. What would this version of Ochako say, if she knew that Izuku held her quirk under his skin? Midoriya Izuku. Izuku shakes her hand, introducing himself to one of his best friends as if she doesn't already live inside his heart. It's nice to meet you, Uraraka-san. The three-pointer's head pops off with a hiss of smoke and a crackle of sparks. Izuku flips off of its head and shoots out more tendrils of black whip. They smash into the red sensors of another robot's face, and it immediately shudders to a stop and tips over. Izuku vaguely wonders how he would have done, the first time around, if he had known about the shutdown sensors. Actually, he wonders how everyone with non-combative quirks would do if they knew about the weak points. But figuring that out is just another part of the test. It feels like cheating, a little bit, to be competing against untrained teenagers when Izuku has years of practice and experience under his belt, not to mention insider information. Izuku keeps having to remind himself that he is only reclaiming his own spot in the hero course, not stealing anyone else's. Plus, well, the fate of the world and hero society are depending on Izuku right now. He can't take chances here. Izuku scales up the side of a building and surveys the area around him, searching for enemies and people in trouble. One for all thrums under his skin. Izuku can almost taste the spark of it on the back of his tongue. But Izuku doesn't dare use it while under the watchful eyes of Yue. Even if All Might wouldn't notice, Nezu and Aizawa certainly would. Just as Izuku's about to drop back down to street level, he notices two robots flanking a student. A boy in all black, with familiar lilac hair, and a limp in his step. Izuku doesn't hesitate, he takes off in a dead sprint, jumping across rooftops and flipping over alleyways with reckless abandon. And when Izuku is close enough, he flings himself off the edge of the building in something that might technically be a tad too daring for an untrained 15-year-old. Well, it's not every day that you get to re-meet one of your best friends. Izuku lands on the head of the three-pointer as he grabs Hitoshi with a strand of black whip, pulling him out of reach of the two-pointer. Izuku hoists Hitoshi up into the air where he won't get caught in any of the debris, and then Izuku kicks off of the robot, forcing it to crash into its friend. Izuku sets Hitoshi down on the other side of the street, shooting him a sheepish, but friendly smile. Sorry for grabbing you like that. Izuku apologizes, his eyes surveying his friend for any injuries. Looked like you might need some help. It's the wrong thing to say. Izuku forgot for a moment that this Hitoshi is not his friend. That right now, Hitoshi doesn't know him. He forgot for a moment that at this age, Hitoshi is bitter and spiteful. Angry at the world for knocking him down over and over again. He forgot for a moment that this Hitoshi is still a lonely kid with something to prove. Hitoshi pushes himself up roughly, wobbly on what Izuku thinks must be a sprained ankle. Yeah, thanks, he spits. Shouldn't you be getting back to racking up points? Or are you so confident that you'll get into the heroics course? Izuku just watches Hitoshi for a moment, taking in the dark bags under his eyes and the bitten raw fingernails. His dirt-smeared chin and the newly yellowed bruise on his cheek. Izuku's chest aches. Aches for the friend he left behind and aches for the boy who is standing right in front of him. Izuku pulls his thoughts away from that spiraling path, forcing his gaze to snap away from Hitoshi's angry glare and red-rimmed eyes. Izuku digs through his pockets, his fingers quickly wrapping around the collapsible baton he brought with him. This exam is really biased toward non-combative quirks, he says conversationally, flicking the baton out to its full length. Hitoshi watches Izuku warily. He jerks back when Izuku extends the baton toward him, gait unbalanced with his sprained ankle. He looks down at Izuku in confused suspicion, his fingers frozen just above the offered weapon. It's unfair, Izuku goes on, but there are always ways around that. Izuku jabs a finger toward a robot down the street. Rake half of the red sensors and they'll go down. Hitoshi's brows furrow, he looks at the robots Izuku took out earlier, soaking in that new information. And then his fingers suddenly wrap around the baton, a determined glint filling his purple eyes. Izuku and Hitoshi share a smirk, and for an instant, it feels just like old times. Izuku turns away, Black Whip already lifting him into the air. "Good luck," Izuku calls over his shoulder, and then he's launching himself back into the fight. It won't be enough, Izuku knows. There isn't enough time left for Hitoshi to get into the heroics course. But maybe he'll leave today feeling a little less disappointed. And later, when they're both in UA, when Izuku finds him again, maybe Hitoshi won't feel as alone. By the time the 0-pointer comes out, Izuku knows he already has enough points to be allowed into the hero course. He has at least 40 combat points, and though he doesn't know how they determine rescue points, he's sure he has quite a few of those too. The ground shudders as the 0-pointer is released, and Izuku stands there, watching as it walks through buildings and sends debris falling to the street, feeling morbidly nostalgic. The other examinees shout in surprise and fear, tripping over each other as they flee the scene. Izuku catches a shock of electric blue and the rumble of engine-propelled legs out of his peripheral, and something stunned and delighted bursts in his chest. "Tenya," he whispers to himself, whipping around to see if he can catch sight of his friend in the midst of all the chaos. That's when he hears the scream. Izuku remembers Ochako crying out in the original timeline, both in shock and fear. But this time Ochako's voice cracks in the middle with tears, and Izuku can tell she's hurt. Something visceral and burning explodes in Izuku's chest, and suddenly, he's moving. He can't be sure if the slight burst of One for All is visible along his skin. TTER in this moment, his mind is screaming at him to keep Ochako safe, to protect her, to save her. Black Whip bursts from Izuku's arms, shooting out and grabbing onto two opposing buildings, and then he's slingshotting himself up into the sky. The wind whips against his face and hair, his eyes water and his face stings, and Izuku finds himself missing his mask, almost feeling naked without it. Even without the use of float or zero gravity, Izuku still soars through the air. One for All buzzing inside his veins, lighting up his whole body, screaming to be let free. Izuku hasn't felt this whole, this alive, this at home in his own skin, in almost a year. It's invigorating, it's intoxicating, it's liberating. It's everything he's missed about being a hero. The face of the 0-pointer looms overhead, and Izuku gives a wordless yell as Black Whip erupts out of him. Tendrils lashing out and smashing through the sensors on the 0-pointer's face like a sword through flesh. The black tendrils shoot out the back of the 0-pointer's head, a flash of light, a burst of glass, and then a plume of smoke. Izuku watches it for a moment, suspended in the air, making sure it's going to tip backward. And then Izuku is falling, dropping out of the sky without the robot for Black Whip to hold onto. He plummets toward the ground, but unlike last time, Izuku isn't panicked and broken with the repercussions of his own power. The 0-pointer hits the ground before Izuku does, a vortex of dust and smoke rushing up with its sudden impact. Izuku throws his arms out wide as he's abruptly swallowed by the dust, adding his own smoke to the mix as a cover. Safe behind the cloud of smoke, Izuku lets float take over his body. He lands gently, feet sat back down on the pavement. "Uraraka," he calls, already running toward her. I'm here," she calls back, coughing against the smoke and dust. I can't get out." "It's all right," Izuku says, and then he's crouching down in front of Ochako, giving her one of his smiles. "I'm here now. I'm gonna get you out." Ochako stares at Izuku with wide, teary eyes. Her mouth forms a small O as she gapes up at him, looking mystified and a little shocked. But well, it's not every day that you're almost trampled by a gigantic robot. It makes sense that Ochako would feel overwhelmed. "Okay," she murmurs, that would be nice." Izuku nods, already thinking of the least painful way to get her out. He's pretty sure her leg is broken this time, with the way it's twisted under debris. "Hey, Uraraka," he says as he begins clearing some of the rubble away, trying to distract her. "What's your quirk?" My quirk?" Ochako asks, confused, her voice strained as the weight on her leg fluctuates. "Yeah," Izuku says, feeling a little lightheaded at the sight of Ochako injured and pinned down. A part of his brain is screaming that they need to move, that they need to get out of this vulnerable position before the chance is taken away from them. Izuku keeps having to remind himself that this is just a test, that no one is hunting them down, waiting to rip them apart. But it's hard to shove down those instincts, to stop his thoughts from spiraling. Would it be able to help us get you out? Izuku asks, because he knows it would. He can get the rubble off, but her zero gravity would help to elevate her broken leg without jostling it any further. It's called zero gravity, Ochako says, giving a small whimper of pain when Izuku uses Black Whip to lift the last chunk of debris off. It cancels out the gravity of anything I touch. Izuku doesn't have to feign his fascinated smile. Ochako has always been amazing. Wow, he breathes, that's a wonderful quirk. It'll be so useful in hero work. Can you use it on yourself? Ochako nods, tears of pain filling up her eyes. Why yes, but it makes me nauseous. Izuku grimaces, he knows how it feels to use zero gravity on yourself. He's been training with her quirk for over a year now, and he still gets nauseous. Can you use it on your leg? Maybe try it on your pants and shoe? Izuku instructs. If you take the weight off it, it'll be easier for me to carry you out of here. Okay. Ochako nods, having to stretch out at an odd angle in order to reach her shoe. Got it. Good job, Izuku says, and then he bends down to gently pick up his friend. I'll be careful, he murmurs, but it'll probably still hurt, sorry. Ochako grimaces as Izuku picks her up, her face bleeding of all color. Izuku wonders for a moment, if she's about to throw up on him. It's not your fault, she tells him, her eyes firmly squeezed shut. If anything, I should be thanking you. You saved me. Izuku hums distractedly, stepping over cracked pavement and random wreckage. You don't have to thank me, he says, you would do the same if you saw someone who needed help. Izuku glances over to Ochako, their faces only inches apart. That's why we're going to be heroes, isn't it? Ochako looks surprised as her eyes snap open to meet Izuku's. Her cheeks go pink even though the rest of her skin is still pale with pain and nausea. Why yeah. Yes, she whispers. That's why we're going to be heroes. Izuku gives her one of his more private smiles. Not the one that he used to flash at the cameras, or the one he wore during villain attacks. But one that feels soft and real on his face, one that he hasn't felt in a very long time. Izuku takes a deep breath, savoring this moment, and then he steps out into the light, dust and smoke trailing behind him. His acceptance letter comes a little over a week later. Izuku knows he got in, he's sure of it. But even with knowing that, he still just sort of stares at the letter for a long while. Tracing his fingers over the wax, his eyes scanning the white envelope over and over again. It feels like a lifetime ago, the first time Izuku had sat down and opened his acceptance letter. So much has changed since then. Izuku has changed so much since then. Even though he was expecting it, Izuku's stomach still flips at the sight of All Might's face appearing on screen. Yes. Hello? Is it working? He asks someone behind the camera, half of his form cropped out of the shot. Izuku chokes on a laugh that sort of sounds like a sob, staring up at the screen with something like grief, something like happiness, something like loss, clogging up his throat. Toshinori suddenly swivels back into frame. Yes. Hello. I am here. As a projection, Toshinori exclaims, fully in All Might mode. Congratulations, Midoriya Izuku. You have made it into UA's heroics program. You passed the written exam with flying colors, and you were able to obtain 53 combat points in the practical exam. This alone would have given you admittance into the hero course. Toshinori pauses, glancing at the camera and to Izuku. The weight of his gaze, even though this is pre-recorded, even though Toshinori isn't actually seeing him, even though this version of Toshinori doesn't even know him, makes Izuku's breath stutter and his heart clench. However, there were other factors, you see. The practical exam was not graded on combat alone. Toshinori spins around, gesturing to a screen behind him which is showing Izuku taking down robots, and then handing Hitoshi his baton. For figuring out how the robots worked, as well as successfully sneaking in a weapon, 27 espionage points. Izuku jerks back in his chair in surprise, blinking stupidly up at the projector. He hadn't known espionage points were even a thing. He remembered Aizawa mentioning that weapons were allowed, that you could either ask for permission to use support gear beforehand, or, if you were brave enough and you didn't get caught, then you could sneak some in yourself. So Izuku had decided to BTH him, as well as some bandages and first aid items, just in case. But Izuku hadn't realized it was another aspect of the test. Izuku tunes back in as Toshinori goes on. And for unthinkingly helping others, as well as valiantly taking the zero-pointer head-on when you saw someone in trouble. 74 rescue points. Toshinori beams at the camera. Smile wide and eyes flashing. This puts your score at a whopping 154. A new record for UA High. A total of 36 points more than the last record holder. He pauses here, before jabbing a thumb to his own chest. Me. Izuku's chair tips over as he springs up, his hands flying to his hair. What? He half screeches half squeaks, completely floored. Izuku hadn't meant to do that well in the entrance exam. He made sure he'd get in, obviously, but he wasn't trying to break any sort of record, let alone any of All Might's. Welcome, Midoriya Izuku, Toshinori says, voice softer this time. It pulls Izuku out of his frantic thoughts, his eyes sliding over to stare at his mentor, at his hero, to Your Hero Academia. The screen goes black. Izuku stands there in the dark, clutching to the front of his t-shirt, his heart pounding. He's reeling, utterly floored. He can't believe that he's somehow scored more than All Might, than anyone else in UA history. He glances around his childhood bedroom, thinks of the quirkless kid he used to be, thinks of where he started, how hard he has worked, all that he has done, all that he has failed to do. It's only when he tastes the salt of tears in the back of his throat that Izuku realizes that he's crying. He sinks down to the floor, curls one hand around his stomach, the other coming up to press against his quivering mouth. More than anything, Izuku wants to share this moment with Toshinori. He wants to run down to the beach where they spent so much time together, where Izuku's training began. He wants to go to Toshinori, because he, out of everyone, would understand what something like this means to a quirkless boy. He wants to call All Might, to tell him everything. He wants to tell him about the future, and about One for All and all the other quirks that come with it. He wants to tell Toshinori what's ahead of them, about All for One's survival, and his plans. He wants to tell him about the future and what they lost, and how Izuku plans to make it right. He doesn't want to be alone in this anymore. He wants someone to have his back, he wants someone to help him through. Izuku sits in the dark of his bedroom and cries. The night before his first day at UA, Izuku hardly sleeps. He rolls from side to side, picking at his blankets, staring out the window, alternating between nervous excitement and cancerous dread. UA is where he found his friends. UA is what put a target on their backs. UA is where Izuku began his journey as a hero. UA is the place that failed to protect them. UA is the beginning of it all, good and bad. Izuku gives up on sleep somewhere around 5 a.m. and hunkers down at his computer only to find himself watching a familiar video. Fear not, citizens, All Might calls. Izuku whispers the words under his breath, feeling that sticky anxiety in his chest start to lessen. Hope has arrived, because I am here. Izuku pauses the video on All Might's beaming smile, and only then does he realize that he's smiling back. Izuku clenches his fists, One for All a pulsating thing in his veins. He swears he can feel the past holders pressing in around him, lending Izuku their combined strength. Izuku takes a breath and stands up. His mom is waiting for him when Izuku leaves his room, buzzing about the kitchen, spices and ingredients floating around her as she frantically cooks breakfast. It takes her a moment to notice Izuku, standing there watching her. But when she does, she freezes, the items in the air tumbling to the counter and ground. Izuku jolts, glancing to the broken egg on the floor and back up to his mom. Mama? He asks hesitantly. His mom blinks back to herself, her hands bunching up her apron. Sorry, sweetie, she murmurs, you just look so grown up, she says, voice watery. Oh, Izuku sags with the realization. Because he had forgotten again, that while this might be his first day of high school, it is still his mom's first time sending him off. Izuku takes a step forward, carefully walking around the broken egg in the middle of the kitchen floor, before he pulls his mom in for a hug. He's grown in the past year, and it shows in the way his mom's head rests on his shoulder, the way he can see over her head. Though Izuku is nowhere near what he used to be. I'm not that grown up, he assures her with a soft smile she can't see, sharing in a joke that only he can understand. His mom gives a sniffling sort of laugh before pulling away, smiling wetly at Izuku. She gently tugs on his jacket, straightening it and trying to smooth out persistent wrinkles. She sighs, looking directly at Izuku. "I'm really proud of you, Izuku," she says, and Izuku feels something warm and aching bloom in his chest. "Thanks, Mom," he says, the last of his jitters petering out in the face of his mom's beaming smile. Izuku arrives at UA early enough that the school is still empty and quiet. He drifts through the halls, lets his feet take him where he needs to be, even as Izuku's mind floats somewhere between past and present. He remembers vividly, running down these very same halls. Blood matting his hair to his head and dripping between his fingers. He can almost taste the smoke in the air, feel the way his heart had pounded so hard he could feel the pulse of it under his tongue. He remembers the screech of the Nomu, the click of their claws as they raced, four-legged and carnivorous, along the floors and walls and ceiling. Eyes gleaming in the dark, teeth shimmering in the light of stars and flames. Izuku remembers, vividly, what it is like to be hunted down in these very same halls. White smeared over in red splatters and black scorch marks. The screams of students and civilians echoing and blood-curdling, until there were no screams at all. Izuku's breath hitches, catching painfully in his chest. He stops in the middle of the hallway, shoes squeaking against the freshly polished floor. His fingers feel numb, his limbs bloated with unreleased energy. His heart is pounding in his ears, so loud it almost drowns out the sound of his own labored breathing. Izuku spins on his heel and ducks into the nearest bathroom, trying to blink shadowed figures out of the corners of his eyes. He stumbles over to the sink, clutching to the ceramic hard enough that it cracks underneath his fingertips. Izuku forces himself to let go, to breathe, to get it together. He lets out a gust of air as he glances up at himself in the mirror. He hardly recognizes the person staring back at him. Wild green hair sticking up at unruly angles, unscarred pale face, baby fat still lining his two young cheeks, freckles splashed along the bridge of his nose and below his sleep-deprived eyes. Izuku hasn't been this person, this child, in years. He feels so distant from the person he used to be, someone who still believed that heroes were infallible, unstoppable, invincible. Someone who saw the best in people in the world, who thought everyone deserved a second chance. A boy who truly believed he could make a difference, that he could save people. Izuku blinks at his past self in the mirror and wishes he could find that same resolve, that same determination, that same sense of hope he'd felt before. All those thoughts seem so out of his reach now. Izuku shakes his head to himself and leans down to splash some cold water onto his face, trying to scrub the past 5 years from his skin. And when that doesn't work, scrubbing away any sign of his breakdown instead. Izuku makes his way to 1A without any further interruptions, sliding into the classroom and shutting the door behind him. Even with his delay in the bathroom, Izuku is still the first to have arrived. Which might be for the best, seeing as he isn't taking his first day back in UA as well as he should be. It's hard to remember that he is a seasoned pro while standing here, amongst 20 desks in a familiar classroom. Izuku feels caught somewhere in the middle. He doesn't feel 15, not really, but he doesn't feel 19 either. It's hard not to feel like a kid while wearing this uniform. But it's hard not to feel like a soldier while inside these walls. Izuku runs his hands over a row of desks as he makes his way to his seat, taking off his backpack and lowering himself to his own desk in a dazed sort of stupor. It's hitting him harder than he thought it would, being back here. He needs to pull himself together before any of his classmates show up, or God forbid, Aizawa-sensei. It's not long after Izuku has sat down, that the door slides open and Momo walks in. She pauses when she catches sight of Izuku, feet stuttering. "Oh," she says, clearly having thought she'd be the first to arrive. They are both absurdly early after all. She catches herself, smoothing out her surprised expression and walking up to Izuku, hand extended. "Hello," she greets. "I'm Yayorozu Momo. I must apologize, I hadn't expected any of my classmates to have arrived so early." Izuku gives Momo's hand a quick squeeze, forcing himself not to linger. He smiles at her, and it feels real on his face. "No need to apologize," he tells her. "I wouldn't have expected anyone else either. But I wanted to get here early. First day nerves, you know?" Momo gives a tentative smile, one of her closed-mouthed and genuine ones. She nods, giving the room a quick glance. "It is, a bit intimidating, isn't it?" Izuku looks at Momo. The way she's clutching her books to her chest, back stiff and armored straight, uniform freshly ironed and perfect in every way. everything about her put together and composed. Looking at her, Izuku only sees a scared and overwhelmed kid. Terrifying is the word I'd use, he says, and Momo's head whips around to gape at him. Izuku gives her a soft smile, one that he used to use when he was pulling civilians and children out of harm's way. We made it, we're finally here. In the UA Hero course. And Izuku takes a moment, looks around at the rows of desks and the lockers lining the wall. And it's amazing and incredible, but it's also terrifying. He glances back up Trade at him. Her fingers have gone slack around her textbooks, some of the tension in her shoulders having lessened. She gives a small nod before she mumbles, yes, that is exactly it. A moment of silence stretches between them, and then Momo is clearing her throat, saying, you are? Izuku blinks in bewildered surprise, before it hits him. Because of course Momo would need a proper introduction, because while Izuku knows her fears and insecurities and even some of her secrets, this version of Momo does not remember him, doesn't know him. Feeling stupid, Izuku gives a slight bow of his head. Oh, yes, my name's Midoriya Izuku. It's very nice to meet you Yaoyorozu-san. It's going to be so odd, having to reintroduce himself to his classmates again, to have to start from square one, to have to earn their trust, and slowly become their friend again. But as Momo goes to sit down and Denki and Fumikage filter into the class, Izuku thinks to himself, how lucky he truly is, to get to re-meet his friends again. No one else will get to experience such a gift, to have the same friendships in 2 different lifetimes. It's about 10 minutes until the start of class, and Izuku is doing his best not to outright stare at any of his former and current classmates. It's hard not to when he has waited so long to see them again. It's so odd seeing them all like this, young and carefree, excited for their first day at UA. So unaware of the burdens they'll later hold, of all the pain and suffering that waits for them. Izuku shakes his head at himself, gritting his teeth. No, he won't let it happen again. He'll protect them, so his classmates can keep what's left of their childhoods, and grow into adulthood, into the heroes they were always destined to be. Izuku is so preoccupied with his thoughts that he doesn't notice Kyoka approaching him until she's already standing right at his desk. Izuku jolts in surprise, giving her a practiced smile. Good morning, he says, feeling a bit caught off guard. Out of all of his friends, Izuku wouldn't have thought Kyoka would be the one to approach him like this. Her expression is pinched and slightly awkward as she replies, good morning, I think you're in my seat. Izuku pauses, taking stock for a moment. He's definitely in his seat, chair 12, in front of Shoto and behind Juzo. But when Izuku glances up, he finds Mezzo in front of him, large and strong even at this age. A glance behind him shows Hanta, and a quick scan of the rest of the classroom only solidifies Izuku's raising anxiety. There is a mixture of Class A and Class B students around him. He hadn't noticed before, trying to keep his head down so he wouldn't openly stare at his lost friends. But now that he has finally looked up, he finds himself choking on air. Izuku's eyes skip around, searching for his classmates, and some are correct, like Momo, Kyoka, and Koji. But others are wrong. Mina, Hanta, and Eijiro are not supposed to be in Class 1A. Oh God, oh no. Izuku stands up abruptly, feeling a little winded at the realization. It's a small detail in the grand scheme of things. But it isn't one that Izuku had anticipated, and it leaves him feeling dizzy. He always assumed that Aizawa-sensei and Kon-sensei had a say in who would be in each of their classes, or at least, that Nezu arranged the classes himself. But he supposes their assigned classrooms must have been randomly given, because as Izuku glances around, somewhat panicked, he finds that half the faces are wrong, and others are missing. Oh God, what if him getting so many points in the practical exams somehow screwed up their chances and some of his classmates didn't make it into the hero course at all? But no, even if these aren't all his same classmates from 1A, they do all seem to be the same hero students from Izuku's timeline. He recognizes everyone, even if the 2 classes got shuffled up. Izuku still knows these people. He still trusts them, even if he never got the chance to know Hagakure or Ojiro all that well in the previous timeline. Even if he only met Aoyama and Soda in passing or in battle, he still knows them. It will be all right. Oh God, please let Ochako be in his class. Are you okay? Kyoka asks, face twisted in concern. and Izuku suddenly realizes that he's standing in the middle of the classroom scanning his classmates with unconcealed panic. Kyoka can probably hear Izuku's breath rattling out of his lungs. "Why yes," he says, too loud. Izuku tries to will himself to calm down. "Yes, I'm fine. I'm sorry about taking your seat. That was my assigned place in my old class. I guess I just sat there out of habit." Kyoka nods as she slides into the seat Izuku had just been occupying. Izuku is quick to pull his backpack and notebook out of her way. "It's fine," she says with a shrug. She slips off her messenger bag, hooking it on the seat behind her. "I'm Jiro, by the way." Izuku distractedly starts pulling out his class schedule from his bag, frantically looking for his new seat assignment. "Izuku," he replies, and then realizes they're not on a first-name basis. "Midoriya Izuku," he corrects himself. He's going to need to stop referring to his friends by their given names, even in his head, or else Izuku is eventually going to slip up. And he can't think of a good excuse for accidentally calling someone by their given name when he's only known them for a day. "Got your seat number?" she asks Izuku after a moment, watching as Izuku fumbles with his papers, scanning them quickly. "Yeah," he says, nodding his head toward the front. I'm 18 this time around." "This time around, Kyoka?" Jiro asks, raising an eyebrow. Izuku waves off the question, heads for his new seat, tries not to let his hands shake too much as he settles his papers back down. "Nice to meet you, Jiro-san," he says, sorry for the seat theft. "Nah, you're cool, Midoriya, Deku." Izuku spins around to find a very irate Bakugo Katsuki heading straight for him. "Oh. Wow. Looks like Kachan is in his class this time around." Izuku is somehow both wary and relieved to find this out. Even if half of his classmates are in Class 1B, at least this time, he'll have Kachan by his side straight from the start. Though, Kachan does not look happy to see Izuku. Which, Izuku isn't all that surprised about, seeing as he's been avoiding the other boys since they both got their acceptance letters into UA 3 weeks ago. Izuku even skipped out on the meeting with the principal at Aldera. He really didn't want to be there when the news about Izuku getting first place was given to Kachan. He was mad enough the first time around, when Izuku had just barely scraped by. Izuku didn't want to imagine how Kachan must have reacted when he found out that Izuku placed higher than him. "You shitty nerd," Kachan slams Izuku into the wall behind him. Not hard enough to hurt, but certainly hard enough to let Izuku know not to try anything. "You think you could avoid me forever? That I wouldn't find out?" Izuku grabs onto Kachan's wrist, the one tangled in Izuku's blazer. He holds on, not trying to pry Kachan off, but not letting him press Izuku against the wall any harder. "I didn't need to avoid you forever," Izuku starts, drawing out the word, pretending this isn't the most grounded he's felt all morning. "Just until we were both on UA grounds." "What's that supposed to mean?" Kachan sneers, pressing up against Izuku, using his superior height to bear down on him. Well, joke's on him, because Izuku knows that he ends up taller than Kachan. Izuku whispers the next part, so only Kachan will hear, well, and Kyoka and Mezzo, he supposes, but there's no helping that. UA takes acts of bullying and quirk discrimination very seriously. They're training the next generation, they can't be lenient with such things. So the only time I have to worry about you now, Kachan, is when we're off of school grounds, or in hero training. Which I insist you give your all in. Izuku leans up, smiles, challenging. Because I'm going to do my best to become the hero I know I can be. Izuku pushes Kachan off of himself, slides away from the wall and slips past the other boy. You did it, Katsuki. We did it, Izuku tells him. We're here, we're finally at UA. The school where true heroes are made. Now, are you going to keep trying to pin me down under your shoe, or are you going to do your best to catch up to me? Kachan's eyes are blazing. He bares his teeth at Izuku, sparks popping in his enclosed fists. Why would someone like me need to catch up to a Deku like you? I left you in the dust back when we were just kids. Izuku raises an eyebrow, unperturbed. Did you? He hums under his breath, turning away from his childhood friend. I wouldn't be so sure, Kachan. I might just surprise you. At that moment, danger sense jolts through Izuku's skull, the sound of tiny explosions popping as Kachan lunges for the back of Izuku's head with a shout of rage. But Izuku twists around and captures Kachan's hand in his own before he can light Izuku's hair on fire, the two of them coming to an abrupt standstill in the middle of the classroom. They stare at each other for a long tense moment, red eyes blazing, green eyes anticipating. What is going on here? A very familiar voice demands from the doorway. Izuku drops Kachan's hand and takes a step back, watching as Kachan does the same, still seething. Izuku turns away from him, and stares right at his old teacher. Something in his chest clamps down and twists hard enough to leave Izuku breathless. It's such a strong visceral feeling, that for a moment, Izuku wonders if Kyoka can somehow hear it. "Apologies, sir," Izuku says, standing up straighter under Aizawa's unimpressed gaze. "Just a bit of a misunderstanding." Aizawa-sensei's eyes track from Izuku over to Kachan, slow and calculating. Izuku can see the exact moment that Aizawa-sensei decides that he's too tired to deal with them right now. "Don't make a habit of having misunderstandings in my classroom," he says, glaring at the two of them. "I don't tolerate melodrama, and I definitely don't tolerate quirk usage outside of training." The last part is aimed at Kachan, who scoffs under his breath. Aizawa-sensei pauses, scanning over the rest of the class. "Hello, I'm Aizawa Shota." He introduces himself as he walks into the room. He doesn't have his sleeping bag this time around. Izuku wonders if he left it behind when he heard Kachan and Izuku arguing. "I will be your homeroom teacher this year." He stops in front of them all, and Izuku gets such a sweeping sense of déjà vu that he wavers on his feet. "All right, put these on and meet me outside," Aizawa-sensei says, pulling a set of gym clothes seemingly out of nowhere. "It's time we get started." He turns, heads for the door. "Welcome to UA's hero course." And with that, he's gone, and Izuku has to hide his wavering smile behind the palm of his hand as his classmates break out into confused and excited whispers. Izuku goes and grabs his gym uniform, feeling floaty and a little bit like he's running headlong into a battle. "Here we go again," he murmurs to himself. And so, for the second time, Izuku's high school career begins. Izuku is the first one to change and get out of the locker rooms. The rest of the boys had been chatting amicably and introducing themselves to one another, taking their time in putting their gym uniforms on. Izuku knows he should have taken a moment to reintroduce himself to his classmates. But while Izuku knows that there is no need to rush, the habit of being quick is too ingrained for him to ignore. Aizawa-sensei is, of course, already out on the field. Izuku shares a brief nod with his teacher and then pulls his gaze away. It seems like that's what Izuku has been putting all of his energy into this morning. He hadn't realized how hard this would be. To be amongst his old classmates, to stare them in the eye and pretend he doesn't know their names. To stand next to them, seeing them so animated and alive and happy, and to ignore the memories of dust and cinders, of blood and screaming. Save them. Save them. He has to save them. Izuku takes in a breath large enough to fill up his whole entire chest, and lets his eyes wander toward the beaming blue sky. The sunspots obscuring his vision are nearly enough to burn away the ash floating at the corners of Izuku's eyes. Save them. Save them. Save them. It takes him a moment to feel the eyes on him, but then Izuku is looking back down, toward Aizawa, who has his tired gaze locked on Izuku, seeming curious. Izuku bites back a smirk. He always knew that Aizawa-sensei would be one of the biggest players on the board. That Izuku would have to watch out for him from the start. Aizawa-sensei is incredibly observant and calculatingly smart. But it will take more than some probing looks and some cursory poking around for Aizawa to find what he's looking for. "Sorry, Aizawa-sensei," Izuku mentally apologizes to the man. "But I've already accounted for you." "It's you?" A voice from behind him startles Izuku. But then he's twisting around and seeing a very welcome face. "Ochako," he calls beaming, and then immediately winces at his mistake. He pushes forward, hoping Ochako won't notice his slip. "How's your leg?" he asks. Ochako lifts up her right leg, twisting it back and forth in the air as if to prove that it is no longer broken. "Recovery girl fixed it," she says, smiling at Izuku. "Thanks again, for saving me. I'm not sure what would have happened if you weren't there." Izuku's chest feels warm. He tries to make sure none of the love-sick nostalgia shows on his face. "You don't have to thank me," he says, and the words come out maybe a tad too soft. Ochako steps up next to Izuku, knocking her shoulder into his. I was hoping we'd be classmates, she says, glancing out at the track and field. It's always nice to have a familiar face nearby. Izuku blinks at her, suddenly feeling choked. He forces his eyes away, to stop scanning her, looking for the differences, looking for the similarities. Yeah, he says, swallowing hard. Yeah, it is. Once everyone has arrived and Aizawa-sensei has explained that they are doing a quirk assessment test, he suddenly addresses Izuku. Midoriya, he says. You're the current record holder for most points earned in the entrance exam. At that, Izuku's classmates break out into murmurs around him, and Kacchan growls lowly under his breath. Aizawa ignores them all, tired eyes still locked on Izuku. What was your furthest softball throw in junior high? Izuku tries to think back, to years and years ago, when he was young and quirkless and untrained. Somewhere around 45 meters, he hedges, guessing more than anything. Right, Aizawa-sensei nods, gesturing to the circle behind him. Now try it with your quirk. Anything goes as long as you stay in the circle. Izuku breaks away from his classmates, taking the ball from Aizawa's hand. He'd forgotten about this part. The first time around, Aizawa-sensei hadn't even finished his sentence before Mono Minato had stepped up, grabbing the ball and launching it with the fire he had copied from Shoto's right side. That had not gone over particularly well. Izuku shakes his head to himself, knocking those thoughts out of his head. He needs to stay focused on the here and now, make sure he stays grounded in the moment. It's too easy to get lost in his head or his memories. Are you going to throw the ball, or are you going to stand there all day? Izuku inclines his head toward his teacher. Lets Black Whip curl around the softball, energy tingling up his arms and around his waist. Izuku closes his eyes for a moment, thinks about how this went the first time around, when he had so much power and no control over it. When he was terrified and sure he was going to be expelled. When he was a kid in a quirkless body, suddenly bestowed with a quirk more powerful than he could ever imagine. When he was new and floundering and had no idea who or what he was. When he hadn't known what all of it meant for him, for the world. Izuku's eyes snap open and then he pulls Black Whip back and flings it forward, a burst of one for all lacing through him and coursing into the tendrils. There isn't a gust of wind or a boom of sound like there might have been if Izuku used his strength. But the energy still tingles in the air, making Izuku's hair stand up and his skin buzz. He watches the ball soar through the sky until he can't see it any longer, and then Izuku turns back toward his classmates. They're all staring at him in awe and bewilderment, eyes wide and grinning. Ochako smiles beamingly when she catches Izuku's eye, giving him a big thumbs up that immediately makes Izuku's eyes sting. A low pang of danger sense alerts Izuku to Kacchan's glower aimed on him. Kacchan takes a step forward, glaring daggers at Izuku. But Izuku just stares back, shakes his head once, and then inclines his head toward Aizawa-sensei. Don't, Izuku tries to impart with just his eyes. He walks out of the circle, letting small tendrils of Black Whip trail behind him as a warning that he hopes Kacchan heeds for once in his life. And as Izuku steps back into line with his classmates, it seems that Kacchan's common sense wins out over his stubborn rage this time. Izuku watches Kacchan from the corner of his eye, and when Kacchan finally settles down, Izuku does too. Aizawa-sensei hasn't missed the interaction. His eyes are calculating and dark, but thankfully he moves on from it without comment. You all need to know what you're truly capable of, Aizawa-sensei says, holding up his phone for them all to read. 1013.7. You can't possibly become a pro hero without knowing the full capacity of your own quirk. Today is the starting line, where you'll see what you can really do. The rest of the class perks up, talking about how fun using their quirks will be. Izuku winces as he hears Hanta and Mina excitedly talking. And though Aizawa's threat of expulsion is harsh for a class of first years on their first day of school, Izuku gets it. He understands it in a way he wishes he never could. The reason that Aizawa-sensei was so hard on them even from the start. Because this, hero work, this life. It may look glamorous and exciting, but to be a true hero, to be someone who saves people, who puts their life on the line for others, it's harsh and real and terrifying and beautiful. It will change who you are and how you view the world. It will take all the things you thought you knew about yourself and how society works, and it will upend it all. It will leave you questioning everything, questioning yourself. Being a hero isn't a game, it isn't all flashing lights and adoring fans. It's bleeding out in the rain. It's holding on to hope because it's all you have left. It's trying to save everyone but yourself. It's dying over and over again, even though you are somehow, always, the only one left who's still breathing. So Izuku understands why Aizawa taught them the way he did, and he is more grateful for it than he can express. Because if it weren't for Aizawa-sensei's teachings, Izuku doesn't think he'd be here today. No, he knows he wouldn't be here today. And that means something. The world is full of unfairness, Aizawa-sensei tells them. And Izuku didn't understand the full extent of what he meant before, but he does now. It's a hero's job to try to combat that unfairness. If you want to be a pro, you're gonna have to push yourself to the brink. For the next 3 years, UA will throw one terrible hardship after another at you. So go beyond, plus ultra style. Show me it's no mistake that you are here. So, when Aizawa-sensei catches Izuku's eye, while his classmates panic around him, Izuku stares right back, fire in his veins and determination in his heart. Izuku holds Aizawa's gaze and nods. Black Whip isn't as versatile as One for All, but Izuku has always been creative, and he knows how to use it. He has years of training and experience that the rest of his class doesn't have, and it shows in all his scores in comparison to his classmates. Part of Izuku feels like he's cheating, that maybe he should hold himself back or not give these tests his all. But that feels more dishonest somehow. For Izuku to not give his best, while his classmates are giving their all in these tests. So Izuku, in a huge contrast to the first timeline, ends up in first place instead of last. Last goes to one Mineta Minoru, who stares up at the scoreboard with tears in his eyes and a twisted expression on his face. You can't do this, he turns to Aizawa, and Izuku cringes. Well, if Aizawa-sensei was going to be lenient with Mineta the same way he had been with Izuku the first go-around, he sure isn't now. You can't kick me out, Mineta yells, tears and snot running down his face as he stares up at Aizawa-sensei. This isn't fair. The world isn't fair, Izuku thinks to himself, and it's better to learn that lesson right here. Rather than out there, where those very same lessons are taught in blood. Heroes have to be willing to sacrifice everything for the sake of innocence. To be brave in the face of death, to protect others above all else. Izuku never got to know Mineta very well in the previous timeline, since the other boy had been in 1B and Izuku in 1A. But he remembers the last time anyone had seen him. Crying much like this, screaming and frantically trying to stop the Nomu with his quirk. He had panicked, and panicked people make mistakes. But Mineta's mistake had cost people their lives. Izuku glances over to Hagakure and Ojiro, thinking of the UA raids. When they had been pinned back and trapped, and Mineta had sold them out so he could escape. He remembers hearing about it after, when it was too late to do anything but mourn. Izuku watches as Aizawa-sensei dismisses Mineta, and he can't find it in himself to feel anything but relieved. Some people don't seem to understand that in order to be a good hero, first you need to be a good person. After class, once they have all changed and everyone has picked up their syllabus, Izuku finds the courage to approach Tenya. You did well today, in the quirk assessment. Izuku follows Tenya out of the classroom and into the hall. Tenya gives him a surprised, but pleased look. I could say the same to you, he says, turning to Izuku. Iida Tenya, he introduces himself, extending his hand to Izuku. From Summate Private Academy, it's a pleasure to meet you. Izuku takes Tenya's hand, smiling up at him. Midoriya Izuku, he says. Good to meet you, Iida-san. They walk for a moment in companionable silence, headed toward the stairs. Izuku grips the straps of his backpack tightly, taking in slow careful breaths. He needs to play this right, gain his friends back naturally. It won't be hard to earn Tenya and Ochako's friendship. Izuku did it once, he can do it again. It's Shoto and Hitoshi that are going to take more time and planning. Izuku just needs to be patient, he reminds himself. He's been patient for a year now. He can handle a few more days. He'd been going to Aldera every day and pretending to still be quirkless, forcing himself to ignore the angry sneers and mocking jeers of his classmates. Putting on a smile for his mom at home like nothing is wrong. Focusing all of his energy into training and planning, so he could ignore the fact that his friends were out there somewhere, and Izuku had to wait to meet them. Wait. Plan. Focus. Be better. Think faster, work harder. Save them, save them, save them. Izuku clears his throat, walking faster to match his pace with Tenya's. "What do you think of UA so far, Iida-kun?" Tenya immediately begins ranting about how prestigious UA is, how honored he is to be at the #1 hero school. But then he pauses, fingers holding his chin in thought. "But I can't say I agree with Aizawa-sensei's choice to expel a student on the very first day of school. It is quite an abnormal approach to teaching. But I suppose he must know what he's doing. Shaping the hearts and minds of the next generation of heroes must be demanding work." Izuku can't help but smile up at Tenya. He has some of the strongest beliefs and morals that Izuku knows. Tenya's always been a pillar for Izuku in that regard, especially when Izuku has needed support the most. "Hey, wait up, you guys." A voice calls out behind them, and Izuku already knows it's Ochako, even before he sees her coming. "Are you two going to the station?" "Infinity Girl," Tenya says under his breath, and then extends his hand to Ochako. "Iida Tenya from Sumei Private Academy. And to answer your question, yes, we are headed to the train station. You may join us if you'd like." Ochako looks pleased as she carefully shakes Tenya's hand, her pinky held up in order to not send Tenya floating. "Thanks," she says. "I'm Uraraka Ochako, by the way." "It is a pleasure to officially meet you," Tenya says, because at this age, he shows his awkwardness by being as polite as humanly possible. "Hello, Uraraka-chan," Izuku greets, remembering not to use her given name this time. "Hi, Izuku-kun," she says back, foregoing his surname entirely. "Good job in the assessment test today. You have really good control of your quirk." "Thanks," Izuku says as the three of them begin walking together. "It took a lot of practice to control properly." "Well then your tenacity has paid off," Tenya says, gesturing sharply. "I was impressed with how versatile your quirk truly is." Izuku shrugs, looking down at his shoes. "Every quirk is versatile. You just have to figure out how to use it to the best of your abilities. Sometimes it isn't even about the quirk, but about thinking creatively." When he looks back up, Ochako and Tenya are sharing a long look. And then Ochako pumps her fist in the air, declaring, "You're really cool, Izuku-kun." Tenya hums. "I'd have to agree. You're clearly leaps and bounds ahead of me as a hero student. I must strive to catch up with you." Izuku laughs, he's not even sure why. Maybe it's just the absurdity of it all. Maybe it's the sudden onslaught of compliments. Maybe it's the mere proximity to his friends. God, Izuku has missed them so much. "With your quirk?" Izuku starts, giving Tenya a sly smile. "You'll be surpassing me in no time." Tenya splutters, and Ochako joins in when Izuku bursts into delighted laughter. It's when Izuku is walking home from the train station, only a couple blocks away from the apartment, that his phone rings. There aren't many people it could be, he hasn't had the chance to trade numbers with any of his current classmates. And Izuku, as the resident quirkless kid, has a whopping 3 cell numbers saved to his contacts. "Hi, Mama," he says, pressing the phone to his ear. "Are you alright? I thought your shift didn't end until 4 o'clock?" "Hello, sweetheart," his mom says back, voice hushed and hesitant over the receiver. "I took off a little early. I'm on the train now." Izuku feels his brows scrunch in a confused sort of concern. "Are you okay?" he asks her, noting the worried pitch in her tone. He cuts through a back alley, headed back from where he'd just come, picking up the pace as he jogs toward the train station. "Oh, I'm fine, his mom hurriedly replies, a little frantic. "I was going to wait to talk to you until I got home, but I just couldn't wait. How was your first day of school, honey?" Izuku pauses on the sidewalk. A car rushes past him, ruffling his hair and making his blazer ripple to the side. Some children let out shrieking peals of laughter from down the street. Izuku's grip on his phone relaxes slightly as he listens to the dull hum of the RS anxious breathing on the other side. Izuku takes in a stabling breath and reins himself in, pulling his scattered thoughts taut, trying to calm the restless feeling fluttering around in his chest. Izuku isn't sure there is a way to turn his fight or flight response off. It seems to be at a constant buzz at the back of his brain, sat dormant one moment, and then sent into a wild frenzy the next. He knows that's a byproduct of his past. Humans can't be hunted down and made to be prey without diverting back into base instincts. Treat someone like an animal for long enough, and that is exactly what they will become. Izuku just wishes he was a little more like a cunning wolf and a little less like a spooked rabbit. Izuku sucks in a big breath to recenter himself, pulling himself back to the conversation and his worried mother on the other end of the line. It was good, he tells her as he twists on his heel, headed for home. Her frazzled anxiousness makes sense now. Izuku realizes she's probably been worried about him all day, wondering how he's been doing. If the other kids are picking on him, if the teachers are treating him fairly, if he's been deemed a person instead of an object, if he is yet again looked at as a disease meant to be eradicated. Izuku knows the everyday trauma of growing up quirkless is only rivaled by the constant fear of raising a quirkless child. A death sentence for one, a loss for the other. Yeah, it was great, Izuku tells her, thinking of what she'd want to hear. Of what would put her most at ease. Of what he'd told her the first time around. Actually, it was amazing. Tell me about it, is her immediate reply, so Izuku does. He leaves certain things out, as he always does. Like the fact that he scored the highest in the quirk assessment test, or that he's leaps and bounds ahead of his classmates. She doesn't know that he broke the UA record for most scored points in the entrance exam. And she hardly knows much about his newly discovered quirk at all. Izuku hates lying to his mom, but nowadays it seems like he's doing it near constantly. He doesn't outwardly lie. Just leaves certain things out. Lies of omission gradually filling up the space in Izuku's lungs with all the words he cannot say. But sometimes secrets are gentler than truths. A blanket made up of warm lies and soft whispers. Wrapped around a person to guard them from the harsh realities and cold realizations out in the real world. Izuku knows that a blanket is no substitute for a shield. Pretty lies and soothing words will hold up in a battle just as thin fabric would against a sword, leaving nothing but ripped tatters and torn pieces behind. But it is near impossible to rest with nothing but a hard, unyielding shield as your only source of warmth and comfort. Cold and sharp, a constant reminder of what battles lay ahead. Izuku will keep his mom wrapped up in that blanket for as long as he can, because he wants her happy and warm and safe. And when the moment comes that her blanket of lies is stripped away from her, well, then Izuku will gladly be her shield. But for now, because Izuku has missed the gentle piece of it, he joins his mother wrapped up in that blanket made for two. Sometimes it's nice to come out from the bitter cold and to let those warm lies wash over him. Even if he knows, in the end, he will have to drop that blanket and pick up his shield, and wade back out into the storm. So Izuku tells his mom about his day, secrets lining up the walls of his chest. Letting himself pretend for just a little while that he is nothing but a 15-year-old kid talking about his first day of high school. But even still, he can feel the cold pressing in. It's as Izuku is lying in bed, trying to shut off his brain enough to finally fall asleep, that it dawns on him. Izuku springs up, his mattress giving a shuddering squeak under him at the violent movement. He stares at the beaming face of All Might, hung up on the walls across from him. All Might, Izuku whispers to himself, the realization buzzing along his skin. I'm going to meet All Might today. Nervous excitement blooms in Izuku's chest and floods his limbs. That jittery breathtaking feeling that lights you up from the inside out. That beautiful, inescapable, terrifying feeling. Like the first time he'd ever used One for All, or when he'd finally unlocked Nana's power. That rush of excitement that can only come from doing something you never thought yourself capable of. Or perhaps, that you never dreamed would happen in the first place. Suddenly, Izuku can't sit still. He's up and out of bed, shucking off his pajamas and throwing on his joggers. He feels ecstatic and overflowing with energy. He knows that he won't be getting any sleep tonight. But that's fine, Izuku is used to going days without sleep, and he'll have the high of meeting Toshinori again to help push him through. I'm going to meet All Might, today, Izuku whispers to himself again, lifting up his window and sneaking down the fire escape. I'm going to meet Toshinori. One for All lights up so brightly inside of him that it's like Izuku's body can't hold it inside any longer. Veins of red trail down his limbs as he lands. Green lightning crackling from his skin as Izuku makes his way toward the street. Purple mist trailing behind him as Izuku begins to run. Magenta sparks popping from his heels. Blue embers getting caught in his hair. Orange tendrils swaying from his fingertips. White static filling up his brain and leaking from his eyes, and encompassing it all, a glow of bright yellow. Izuku is washed in it, a kaleidoscope of colors and feelings pouring out of him as he sprints down the street. The vestiges' powers pulled together to make something beautiful. A rainbow of color so bright it paints the night around him and leaves Izuku blazing with it. We're here. We're here. We're here. Izuku knows that's what the past holders are telling him, even if he can't hear them anymore. He knows, even with their connection blocked, with their voices and advice and support locked away, Izuku knows. He knows that past users are with him, that he isn't ever truly alone. Even if he can't reach them, he knows they are watching. He knows, because though he may not be able to connect to them anymore, their light and power and quirks still light up his skin and fill his bones. We're here. We're here. We're here. Izuku closes his eyes as he runs, elated tears getting swept back by the wind. I know. I know. I know you are. He tries to convey, wondering if they can hear him any more than he can hear them. Izuku runs until his legs are quivering beneath him and his heart is hammering against his lungs. And then he collapses at the shoreline of Dagoba Beach, sand beneath his knees and waves rushing toward him. Izuku lets his head fall back and blinks up at the starlit sky. I know, he says, out of breath but still ecstatic. I know, he says again. You are all here, he whispers. And we are going to finally meet Toshinori today. Izuku sits on the beach and waits for the sun to rise. He somehow makes it to UA on time. His hair is still wet from his rushed shower, and his tie looks even worse this morning. But well, Izuku never learned how to properly tie it anyway. He's not as early as he'd been yesterday, but there's still some time before class. So Izuku decides to grab some breakfast before first period starts. He's munching on some rice, headed toward class, when he catches a glimpse of dual-toned hair out of the corner of his eye. Izuku can't help himself when he chases after it. Good morning, Izuku says, jogging up to catch Shoto. I saw you yesterday, but didn't get a chance to say hi. Shoto doesn't say anything, but Izuku knows he's listening, probably watching Izuku from the peripheral of his left eye. Izuku made sure not to walk in his blind spot on purpose. Shoto nervous. My name's Midoriya Izuku, Izuku says, not deterred by Shoto's silence in the least. You're Todoroki Shoto, right? Shoto's shoulders go tense, his fingers wrapped tightly around the strap of his school bag. Yes, he answers lowly, not looking at Izuku. Before, Izuku had thought Shoto was someone like Kachan. Someone who thought himself so above his peers that he wouldn't even take the time to talk to them. But Izuku couldn't have been more wrong. Shoto isn't arrogant, he's reserved and withdrawn. As new to having kind classmates and learning how to have friends as Izuku had been. But where Izuku had stuttered and stumbled his way through the unknowns of friendship, Shoto had closed himself off and shied away from it. This time though, Izuku knows a little more about how to make friends, and he knows a lot more about Todoroki Shoto. So he knows when not to push, even if he'd like to. Well, it's nice to meet you Shoto-kun, Izuku says, letting himself lag back. I'll see you in class. Shoto seems caught off guard for a moment, his steps faltering before he continues on. Izuku thinks that's it, until, yes, I'll see you in class, Midoriya-san. Izuku beams at the other boys retreating back, counting the interaction as a win. Izuku doesn't think he would have survived the day if he didn't already have hours and days and weeks of stakeouts, and strategizing, and biding his time under his belt. But as it stands, he's still practically vibrating in his seat when hero training begins that afternoon. Except, instead of All Might bursting in through the door, Aizawa-sensei calmly strides in. Looking haggard and exhausted and entirely done with this school year already, even though it is only the second day. Today is your first official day of Heroics Basics 101, he begins from his place at the podium. He pulls out a remote and clicks, the 20 lockers to the left opening up automatically. These are the costume support designed with your quirks and requests in mind. Put them on and meet me at the bus depot. You have 10 minutes, if you're late, we're leaving without you. With that, Aizawa-sensei begins for the door, and the rest of the class scatters immediately, grabbing for their briefcases and excitedly talking over one another. Izuku snags his briefcase with a quick tendril of Black Whip and jogs after his teacher, his heart hammering in his chest. Aizawa-sensei, he calls, catching his attention as Izuku falls into step with Aizawa's long strides. Will All Might be joining us today? He can't help but ask, trying to smother any hint of desperation from his tone. He shouldn't be approaching Aizawa-sensei in the first place, shouldn't be asking needless questions, shouldn't be drawing any unwanted attention to himself. This is a stupid, reckless, impulsive decision. But Izuku can't help himself. Aizawa sensei gives him a blank look over his shoulder. Like Izuku has asked something extraordinarily ridiculous. He does that thing where he lets the silence draw out, letting you answer your own inane question. Izuku gives the man a sheepish smile, shrugging the uncomfortableness off his shoulders. I heard that he'd be helping to teach first-year heroics now that he's joined UA, Izuku says, glancing down at his shoes so he won't have to look Aizawa sensei in the eye as he feeds him a half-truth. Don't believe everything you hear, Aizawa sensei says. All Might has joined the faculty here at UA. But he will primarily be teaching third years. Now, go change, before you're late to class. Izuku knows a dismissal when he hears one. He bows his head. Hi, he acknowledges, and then he turns for the nearest bathroom. He doesn't have the time or the emotional stability to go join the rest of his classmates in the locker room right now. The disappointment in his gut mixes with the embarrassment already curdling there. He feels incredibly foolish for letting his own excitement mitigate his analytical thought. Of course, Toshinori's first priority would be Class 3A. That is where Mirio is, and Toshinori will be putting all of his time and energy into helping train his new successor. It's such an obvious conclusion. Izuku's an idiot for not seeing that. Izuku huffs at himself in irritation, shucking off his UA uniform for his new hero costume. He's gone through plenty of varying designs over the years. Everything from the costume his mom first made him, to a state-of-the-art suit, to a collage of mismatched items pilfered from whatever he could get his hands on. His new costume, however, was made with a different fighting style in mind. Restricted down to one quirk, Izuku has had to vastly change the way he moves and fights. And with past injuries no longer inhibiting him, Izuku won't have to rely so heavily on shoot style. He's back to square one, for better or worse. For now, he has decided on an inverted design of his past costume. Mainly black with hints of viridian green, made for stealth instead of something that will be distinguishable. For right now he wants to be overlooked, not noticed. An underground hero instead of spotlight. Someone who works in the dark, going after the nastiest people imaginable, someone who gets the job done, and does so alone. His mask fully covers his face, with eye lenses that allow Izuku to see in the dark and will hopefully block out the glow of his eyes when he activates his quirk. He no longer requires braces for his arms, but he had them installed anyway. Better to get support now and not need it later. He decided to also include a short cloak, reminiscent of when he'd inherited Gran Torino's cape. He has steel-toed boots that cut off just below the knee, and extra padding along the joints, because Izuku knows the wear and tear of hero work. He gets all of his gear on in under 4 minutes, and it only takes him that long because Izuku is busy admiring his new equipment and checking the pouches of his utility belt for his requested supplies. He waits around in the bathroom for another minute or two, fiddling with his gloves and stretching out his joints, trying to waste enough time so he won't be the first one changed and outside. Once is just a fluke, twice is a coincidence, but 3 is a pattern. And Izuku knows that Aizawa sensei is a master for spotting patterns and solving puzzles. No need to give him anything more than what Izuku has already let slip. When he thinks he's wasted enough time, Izuku stuffs his briefcase with his clothes into the overhead vent, and makes his way outside to the bus station. When he gets there, Shoto, Ojiro, Fumikage, and Kachan are already lined up at the bus. A few others also making their way over. Izuku can't help but give his classmates a cursory sweep. He sees all the flaws and weaknesses in their costume designs, as well as the hints and makings of their future hero uniforms. He has to bite his tongue as he accounts for all the impractical details, has to remind himself that these are just prototypes for later designs. It takes time and experience to really learn what is and isn't going to work for your quirk and fight style. And right now, Izuku's classmates have neither. Eventually, Shoto will no longer hide his fireside, and Ochako will learn that heeled boots are impractical. Hagakure will be informed of Yue's ability to make an outfit out of her DNA, and Momo will eventually design her own outfit instead of letting her family submit one for her. But for right now, Izuku pulls his hood over his head so he can hide his grimace behind the privacy of his mask. Once everyone has arrived, Aizawa sensei shoos them onto the bus without any indication of where they're going. Without Tenya as their guiding class president, and Momo lacking her innate sense of confidence, the bus is utter chaos. But Izuku expected little else. It's hard not to be excited about their first day of hero training. Izuku follows Ochako onto the bus and Asui as the rest of the class scrambles for their seats. "I like your hero costume," Ochako tells him as the bus begins to move. "It's darker than what I expected from you, though." Izuku pulls up his mask, running a hand through his mussed hair. "Well, actually, I might end up having two costumes, I think," he tells her, twiddling his thumbs together as he shares his thought process. "When I was little, I wanted to be a spotlight hero, like All Might. Someone who saves everyone, who brings people hope. But well, underground heroics have their place for a reason. They're able to reach the people that spotlight heroes sometimes can't, the people who would otherwise be left behind." Izuku stares down at his hand in his lap. He feels that same old resolve setting into his bones as he clenches his hand into a fist. "I want to be a hero to all people. Day or night, publicly or anonymously, I don't care. As long as I save as many people as I can. As long as I'm able to take the hand of anyone who's reaching out for help." "Wow," Asui says from Izuku's other side, startling him out of his thoughts. "You've really put a lot of thought into this, Midoriya-kun." She bows her head slightly at him. "I'm Asui Suyu by the way, but you can call me Su." Izuku nods back, forcing himself to meet her eye. He knows exactly who she is. She had been the first victim of the League of Villains. The first casualty of the war. The first person Izuku had ever watched die, the first person he failed to save. Asui Suyu. At first, before anyone knew who the League really was. Before they were anything but a nameless group of villains. Before the attack at the USJ was considered anything but a tragedy. Her name had circled around the nation. A young girl's life cut far too short. A daughter and sister who was mourned by her family. A child that Yue had failed to protect. But later, when the League had made a name for itself. When they began to attack cities and unleash their Nomu. When Shigaraki was a name whispered for fear of being heard. Then, Asui Suyu became the symbol for the rebellion. The first victim of the League. A young innocent girl, killed for no reason at all. Evil for nothing but evil sake. She represented the death, and chaos, and heartbreak, that the League left in their wake. She represented all the victims of the war, all the people they had lost. She was the face that was plastered across buildings and painted along the streets. She was a sign of what they had lost, and what they were fighting to protect. Izuku never got to know her before. She became a concept more than a person. The first of many. Another person that Izuku wasn't strong enough to save. But Izuku would like to get to know her now. "I'll save you. I'll save you. I'll save you. Nice to meet you, Su," he says, taking her hand and giving it a gentle squeeze in his own. He'll protect her, Izuku vows to himself. He'll protect all of them. He won't let it be like before. He won't let anything happen to them. He refuses to let any one of them become a symbol of loss instead of the heroes they strive to be. "I'll save them. I'll save them. I'll save them." The promise sits heavily inside of his chest. "Welcome to Ground Omega," Aizawa Sensei says once they've arrived and piled off the bus. He gives a vague gesture toward the vast amount of forest behind him. "Today's exercise will be centered on evasion and defense. Quirks are permitted if used non-combatively. If you use your quirk on another student, that is an immediate disqualification." He pauses, waits until everyone nods or gives their assent. "Good." Aizawa Sensei takes a step to the side, showing an orange line painted across the grass. "Your starting point is here. Your goal is to either make it to the exit gate on the other side, or last until time runs out. This is the designated area. Leaving it means you have forfeited. Are there any questions?" Tenya's hand immediately shoots up. "Sensei, sir, will we just be racing against the clock, or are there other factors to account for?" This is where Aizawa Sensei gives one of his terrifying smiles, one that is half hidden in the folds of his capture weapon. "You will have a 2-minute head start, and then I will enter the playing field." The class breaks out into disquieted murmurs, which just seems to make Aizawa Sensei smile all the wider. "Your goal is simple," he cuts through the chatter. "Avoid being caught. Whether that means running or hiding is entirely up to you." He angles himself to the side, sweeping his hand out toward the forest. "Your 20 minutes begins now." Some of the class takes off the second the words leave Aizawa Sensei's mouth. Apparently they've already learned that lesson from the entrance exam. But others, like Izuku, take a moment to assess the situation and think things through. The parameters of the exercise are somewhat vague. Aizawa's sensei didn't specify how far away the exit is, or whether or not he is allowed out of the assigned bounds. Details like that are crucial to know in order to make strategic decisions. Aizawa's sensei knows the playing board and holds far more pieces of the game than any of them combined. But Izuku also knows that out in the real world, best-laid plans scarcely hold up in battle. Having any sort of information beforehand is a luxury, not a guarantee. If you don't treat every mission as if you are headed in blind, then you risk becoming so focused on one thing that you completely overlook another. Go in knowing your plan will need to change and you are more ready to adapt when unknowns fall on top of your head. Izuku turns to Aizawa's sensei, who has his eyes closed, looking halfway to falling asleep while standing up. It's just the two of them now, everyone else having darted off into the woods. Izuku has about 30 seconds before his teacher will begin his hunt. Are you planning to forfeit so quickly? Aizawa's sensei breaks the silence, not bothering to open his eyes. Izuku smirks even though Aizawa's sensei cannot see it, or perhaps, because he can't. You said we can't use our quirks combatively. Does that mean if you capture us, we aren't allowed to fight back? This gets Aizawa's attention. His eyes squint open to stare at Izuku. You can surely try, he drawls. But I doubt it will be much help. And with that, Izuku's 30 seconds are up and Aizawa's sensei's scarf is lashing out. Izuku springs away with a burst of adrenaline, flipping between the strands of Aizawa's capture weapon. It was foolish of you to waste so much time, Aizawa tells him, the two of them doing a bit of a dance as Aizawa's sensei erases Izuku's quirks and Izuku continues dodging. Was it? Izuku asks, a little out of breath now. His heart is pumping, and his muscles are singing. But for the first time in a long time, it's not from training himself into the ground or from running away from his past. Izuku didn't realize how much he missed sparring until this moment. Maybe I'm just helping my classmates get a head start, Izuku says, dropping to his hands so the strands of Aizawa's sensei's scarf launch over him. Cocky, Aizawa's sensei says, but it doesn't exactly sound chiding. I didn't take you for overconfident or stupid. Surely you realize you can't win against me one-on-one. Izuku smiles, flipping through the air and narrowly evading another swipe of the scarf. Sure, he agrees. But you aren't gonna go all out on some first years on their second day of school. And I don't exactly plan on sticking around. Before Aizawa's sensei can reply, Izuku reaches into his utility belt and throws down a glass bottle. It shatters against the ground, releasing a plume of smoke and cutting Izuku off from Aizawa's sight. Izuku had filled up that bottle with some of his own smoke before this battle. He doesn't normally need to store smokescreen. But well, he knows how to counter Aizawa sensei's quirk. With his own quirks returned, Izuku sends out 2 tendrils of black whip and hooks the ends around some neighboring trees. He pulls back, and then launches himself forward, slingshotting through the air and flying high above the treeline. Izuku knows when Aizawa sensei has spotted him, because his quirk vanishes again. But it's already too late. Izuku has enough momentum to keep sailing forward, far out of Aizawa sensei's reach. Izuku cackles as he crashes into the foliage of the trees, sprinting for all he's worth, just because he can. Izuku thinks about heading straight for the exit. He knows he could make it no problem. He's much faster than Aizawa sensei, and he has plenty of experience outrunning people in all sorts of terrain, including the woods. But Izuku doesn't necessarily think this exercise is meant to be treated as a race. It isn't about who gets to the finish line first, it's not even about being found, it's about not getting caught. So theoretically, if Izuku can last the longest in the arena without being captured, then it's a win. He can hear shouting and yelling from up ahead, which answers Izuku's question of whether or not Aizawa sensei is allowed in and out of the orange area. Good to know. A quick jump around the woods lets Izuku gather more information. The orange-bound line is a large square of woods, with a smaller square in the middle. Which means he and his classmates have to run around the inner square, making their trek longer. While Aizawa sensei has the advantage of cutting straight through the middle, meaning he can get across the arena in half the time. It's clever, and it solidifies Izuku's theory even more. Trying to reach the exit on the other side isn't practical, while the students trudge and trample their way through the woods. Having to abide by the boundary, trying to race for the finish line. Aizawa-sensei will have no problem catching them. Meaning they will have a better chance if they choose to avoid or evade. This is about stealth, not stamina. Though that's not to say there won't be plenty of running around in order to stay clear of Eraserhead. They're about 8 minutes into the exercise and already 7 of his classmates have been captured. A robotic voice calls out each elimination when they happen, informing them of their decreasing time and dwindling odds. Izuku's already run into a few of his classmates. He'd knocked into Ojiro high up in some overgrown trees, helped untangle Honda from some foliage and his own tape, and ran beside Mezzo as they heard Aizawa-sensei coming toward them. He doesn't expect it to be him, who sneaks up on Hagakure, however. She lets out a surprised yelp when he gets behind her, apparently not having noticed Izuku's slow approach. Oh gosh, she pants from where she's crouched or sat down at the base of a tree. You scared me, Midoriya. Sorry, he says, crouching down beside her. I thought you'd see me coming. I was looking the other way, she answers him. Foliage and dirt shifting as she moves. Wait, how did you know I was even here? Izuku gives a sheepish shrug. He can't exactly tell her that he can sense other quirk factors. That he can feel the energy like the hum of electricity in the air, pulling at his limbs, calling to him. My quirk is energy-based, he says, which is true. So I can sense other people, which, well, isn't quite true, but isn't exactly a lie either. Izuku stands from his crouch, reaching out a hand for Hagakure to take. But Aizawa-sensei will probably notice you on the ground, you should hide up in a tree. Hagakure rises to her feet with Izuku's help. She sounds sheepish and embarrassed as she says, I took off my shoes and gloves so I wouldn't be seen. And I didn't want to try climbing a tree without any clothes on. Izuku grimaces, he can't help it. You really should have a hero costume, Hagakure-san. It'll help protect you, not just from the bad guys, but from the elements. I can't imagine going out in a fight without any gear. Hagakure makes a low grumbled noise. I know, but if I wear one, then people will be able to see me. Which defeats the whole purpose of an invisibility quirk. Izuku can't help it, he lets some insider information slip. The costume allowance fund is the same for every hero course student. But it shouldn't be. Some people need more gear or support items for their quirks and those needs should be met. Izuku tries to keep the disdain out of his voice, but it's a close thing. The support course can fabricate a costume with your own DNA. But it's an expensive and lengthy process, so they don't tell the students until their 3rd years. Hagakure makes a surprised choke noise. What? Izuku nods, sharing in her anger. It's not Nezu-sensei's fault, it's the board of directors trying to save money. Not wanting to waste resources on students until they've settled on a costume design and are already out in the field. Hagakure sounds outraged this time. What? Izuku gives her a sympathetic grimace. I'm not actually supposed to tell you, I shouldn't even know. But now that you do know, I get your parents to sign something demanding that the school treat you equally and provide you with an actual costume. And if the board fights you on that, you can threaten to speak to the press about your unfair treatment. They won't risk bad publicity. Hagakure stomps a foot, her voice determined now. I will, she says. As soon as I get home, I will. She pauses for a drawn-out moment, seeming to still be thinking it over. Thank you for telling me, Midoriya-kun, she says after a beat. But how do you know all of this stuff? That is a question I'd also like the answer to. A voice comes from overhead, and then Izuku is dodging, as Hagakure shrieks. Eraserhead's capture weapon spooling out toward them. Izuku grabs another one of his glass bottles and slams it against the ground, purple smoke rising up. Run, Hagakure, I got this. Aizawa-sensei descends from the trees to meet Izuku in the smoke. Oh, do you? He asks. This isn't a long-range fight, and I don't plan on losing you a second time. Izuku ducks under one of Aizawa-sensei's legs and sweeps upward with a punch. Aizawa counters, blocking Izuku's fist with his forearm. Izuku gives in kind, going for a kick to the side, forcing Aizawa to either step back or take the blow. You've clearly had combat training, Aizawa-sensei says as he lashes out with his scarf. Where? Izuku rolls to get away and pounces back up, coming at Aizawa-sensei from the side to try and avoid the capture weapon. I've wanted to get into UA ever since I can remember, Izuku says, panting a little. This is the most fun he's had in a while. I've worked hard to get where I am. Aizawa's fist grazes against Izuku's shoulder when he's a tad too slow to dodge, trying to escape Aizawa-sensei's scarf and limbs. Aizawa-sensei uses Izuku's slight stumble to bind his capture weapon around Izuku's ankles. And then Izuku is dangling from Aizawa-sensei's scarf, upside down and staring into glowing red eyes. "You're avoiding the question," his teacher says. Izuku smiles even as all the blood rushes to his head. "I've had a few teachers, Aizawa-sensei," he admits. "But no one you'd know." It's a lie, a blatant one. And if the glare Aizawa-sensei gives him is anything to go by, then he knows it too. Aizawa holds Izuku's gaze for a moment before letting out a sigh, closing his eyes as he lowers Izuku back down to his feet. "You're out, problem child," he says, "go wait with the others." Aizawa-sensei is gone in the next instant, and Izuku is left standing there, blinking numbly at the ground as the familiar nickname echoes in his head. Izuku pulls up his mask and turns for the exit gate, not wanting the cameras to catch the trembling of his smile or the wistful look those words brought to his face. Kachan tails him after school, which, frankly, Izuku should have expected. Katsuki waits until they're nearly at the train station to finally make his move. He sneaks up on Izuku and then shoves him down the hallway leading to the bathrooms, where they're less likely to be seen. "How'd you do it, huh?" Kachan hisses, fist bunched up in Izuku's knotted tie. All these years, he presses Izuku harder into the wall, their noses nearly touching as Kachan-ji. "Tell me how you did it," he finally hisses. Izuku knows exactly what Kachan is asking, but he isn't going to give it to him that easily. "Do what?" he whispers back. Kachan shoves at him before abruptly letting go, taking a step back as his hands crackle and pop at his sides. "What was the point, huh?" he asks, staring down at his shoes. "To make a fool of me? Tricking me all these years, pretending to be weak and useless?" Kachan suddenly looks up, his full glower aimed directly at Izuku. "If you thought that keeping your quirk secret all these years would let you beat me, then you're wrong. I'll still beat you, even with your new quirk." With that, Kachan turns, heading for the exit. Izuku doesn't let him get far. "I wasn't pretending," he says, and Kachan stops. "My quirk came in late," he tells him, staring down at the floor so you won't have to look at Kachan. "I was quirkless," he grimaces, corrects himself. "Or well, I thought I was quirkless. So when I finally did discover my quirk, it came as a shock." Izuku remembers that day vividly. He remembers breaking into Jaku Hospital, cornering all for one's doctor, only to find out it was Dr. Garaki Kyudai, Izuku's childhood pediatrician, and the man who had diagnosed Izuku quirkless. He remembers, days later, when they finally had a moment to spare, when he finally had a chance to catch his breath, when he finally got over the shock of it. He went to Recovery Girl, asking her to do an X-ray on his foot without explaining why. He remembers it like it was yesterday, waiting for that X-ray. It had been a terrible juxtaposition of the first time. Izuku sitting in a doctor's office and staring down at a world-shattering X-ray. But this time he wasn't shown a double-jointed pinky toe, but a whole one. Izuku remembers staring at the image of it until his eyes burned and burned and burned. It had only been the beginning, the tip of an enormous, terrifying, hulking iceberg. There came many more realizations after that. When Izuku was finally able to unlock his born quirk, when he discovered what he could truly do, when he finally understood the true implications of having such a power at his fingertips. To be able to give and take, to steal quirks. Izuku looks up, blinking the memories out of his eyes and staring at this younger version of his friend. "You're right, Kachan. I was weak when we were kids. But I'm not anymore, and I'm going to prove that to you." Kachan scoffs and stalks away, anger radiating off of him. And Katsuki, Izuku calls at Kachan's retreating back, the dim lights of the hallway flickering as the next train arrives. "I may have been weak. But I was never useless, and I'm going to prove that to you too." Kachan leaves, not giving any indication that he heard Izuku's words at all, but Izuku knows he did. The next day the media is crowding the main gate, cornering students and faculty so they can get their scoop on All Might's new job as a teacher, just like they had in the original timeline. Izuku pauses his approach, scanning the mass of reporters for a head of straggly blue hair. Someone lurking at the side, hiding behind a hood or blending in with the throngs of people. One for all buzzes under his skin. Danger sends a quiet hum at the back of Izuku's brain. Later, we'll get him later. Izuku lets out a breath and heads for the gate, forcing himself to let this go. He can't mess this up, he has a plan for a reason. He can't afford to act recklessly. The attack on the USJ is the perfect opportunity. A chance to take down not just Shigaraki, but Kurogiri too. Taking those two main players off the board won't only get them out of Izuku's way, but it will also cripple All for One's plan. Izuku knows this, he knows why he has to wait, but even with that in mind, Izuku can't help it when he scans the crowd out of the corners of his eyes. Looking for, but also dreading, the sight of that hauntingly familiar face. Later, when Aizawa's sensei tasks them with choosing a class president, Izuku somehow winds up with 5 votes. What? He sputters, and then Aizawa's sensei is calling him and Momo up to the front of the room. Midoriya is the class representative, and Yaoyorozu is your deputy, Aizawa drawls, and then he slumps back down to the floor. Use the rest of class as a free study period, he tells them, and then adds, quietly, before closing his eyes. Izuku is still trying to wrap his head around the fact that 5 separate people chose him to be their class president. He felt like it was so clearly meant to be Tenya standing up here with Momo, not Izuku. Izuku turns to Momo, asks, How did this happen, in a stunned sort of bewilderment. Momo gives him an odd look. Don't act so surprised, Midoriya-san, she says. Not only did you break the UA record in the entrance exam, but you also held the top spot during the quirk apprehension test. You've shown great skill and excellent strategic ability these past few days. It's no surprise that people would recognize that and vote for you. Her words only leave him more confused and flustered. Izuku shakes his head and addresses the whole class instead. I'm flattered by the votes, he starts, trying to think of a valid reason to reject his nomination. He can't exactly explain that he's in the middle of preparing for a massive villain takedown, and constantly on edge because of it. He can't explain that all of his concentration goes into planning and replanning because he's constantly battling the feeling that he's missed something. He can't explain that all of his focus has been solely absorbed, and what little energy he has time to spare goes to keeping up with his training and schoolwork. So instead Izuku says, I'm not even sure I want to be a spotlight hero, and wow, isn't that such an odd thing to say? I may end up going with underground heroics. And with that being the case, I think someone else should take this position. Izuku straightens his shoulders and tries not to focus on the fact that everyone's attention is so fixated on him. He feels like he's in a different place, a different time. Like he should be addressing his classmates by their hero names. Giving out orders and contingencies for worst-case scenarios. Strategizing and mapping out their next attack plan. Gearing up and readying themselves for a fight. Trading knowing looks and heartfelt goodbyes before they head back out, because they can never know who is and isn't coming back. Izuku blows out a breath to ground himself. If being the class representative doesn't align with my goals, then I'd feel selfish taking that opportunity from someone else. Izuku looks over at Tenya, can't help the smile that crosses his face. That's why I voted for Tenya, Iida-san. Izuku is quick to correct himself. I think he would make an excellent class representative. He's a no-nonsense kind of guy. And I think if anyone could keep the class in line, it would be him. Izuku has to look away from Tenya's gobsmacked expression. Whoops, maybe he shouldn't have said that. He's supposed to have only known Tenya for a few days. Perhaps Izuku's analysis of Tenya had been a little too insightful. Izuku tries to fix his slip. Or Yaoyorozu-san, Izuku blurts, turning to the girl in question, who's staring at Izuku with wide eyes. I think she would also make a wonderful leader. She's intelligent and adaptable. Izuku blinks to himself, having a sudden thought. Actually, the same could be said for Asui, he realizes. He never got to know her all that well in the first timeline. But even with only having spent a limited time with her, Izuku can tell she will make a great hero someday. Asui is cool-headed and thinks things through, which are great qualities to have. Not just as a president, but as a hero. Asui blinks at Izuku when he catches her eye. She croaks, I told you to call me Kiro. Izuku nods in acknowledgement, but he's still thoroughly swept up in his own train of thought. Tokiyami is very patient and accommodating, so he'd make a great second, he continues, just remembering to not use given names before speaking. So would Shoji for that matter. He's empathetic and caring, he'd be a very helpful deputy. Izuku taps his chin as he mutters to himself. Even Kachan would make a good second, he's smart and capable, and would push the rest of the class to be better. I'd whip these lousy extras into shape, Kachan says, slamming his fist against his desk. Izuku smiles at him, pulling himself away from his runaway thoughts. Anyway. My point is that there are plenty of other candidates for class president. And that, I'm not the right choice. There is a moment of silence, and then Eijiro says, spoken like a true president. To which Denki chimes in with, I want to change my vote to Midoriya. Me too. Hagakure nearly jumps out of her seat. Don't put yourself down, Mido, Mina calls, smacking a hand to her desk. I think you'd make a killer class prez. Yeah, Kyoka murmurs. I don't know who the original 5 were who voted for you, but they clearly had it right. I appreciate you voting for me, Midoriya. Tenya speaks over the building thrum of their classmates. But I voted for you for the very same reason. I believe you could lead this class like no other. The class continues to devolve into excited chatter. Izuku stands at the front, blinking dumbly at the rest of Class 1A. He hadn't expected that to backfire so spectacularly. Oh man, this rice is so good. Ochako is in the middle of saying, mouth stuffed full. Lunch Rush really knows what he's doing. Izuku can't help but laugh. Ochako has always had an appetite to rival the rest of Class 1A. The only one who continuously had the rest of them beat was Momo. Izuku munches at his own food, picking at it more than anything else. His stomach is a churning, roiling mess inside of him. His appetite is non-existent, turned to dust, like the gate outside soon will be. Izuku stuffs some katsu chicken into his mouth to distract himself, but all he can taste is ash. He shakes his head to himself, choking down his bite and turning to Ochako. Do you want some of mine, Uraraka? He asks, offering out his plate. I'm not very hungry. Ochako pauses, giving Izuku a long look, but before she can say anything, Tenya chops his hand through the air. Midoriya-kun. While I can appreciate your willingness to give to our fellow classmate, you need to keep up your strength. You cannot possibly become the best hero you can be if you are skipping meals. Izuku snorts and stuffs another bite into his mouth. He's so distracted by his and Ochako's snickering that he hardly notices the taste of dust coating his tongue. I had a big breakfast, Izuku tells Tenya, which is a flat-out lie, but Tenya doesn't need to know that. Better to share my food than let it go to waste. And Uraraka looks like she could use it more than me. Ochako looks down at Izuku's plate. If you're sure, she starts. But Tenya-kun is right. If you're hungry then you should eat. Izuku slides his plate of chicken over to her, and then takes a bite of his rice. I'm good, he says and then tries for a subject change. So, what inspired you both to become heroes? Tenya starts off tentatively, like he'd done the first time around, not wanting to be judged by his family's fame and fortune. He tells them about his brother, how he aspires to be a great hero like him someday. That he wants to make his family proud, make his brother proud. Izuku hides a wince behind a bite of rice. He knows how much Tensai means to Tenya. He knows, because he watched the way Tenya had been torn apart by his brother's murder. The grief had crippled Tenya far more than the loss of his arm ever did. But Izuku won't let that happen this time, he won't. Ochako is halting and embarrassed as she begins telling them her reasons. She talks about her family's financial issues, how her family is struggling. She talks about how she wants to provide for her parents, so they can finally have the comfortable life they deserve. You know, Izuku starts, fiddling with his chopsticks as he tries to word this in a way that won't come off as rude. I heard that if you get to UA early enough and ask nicely, that lunch rush will make you breakfast as well. Ochako stares at him with wide eyes, her cheeks stuffed full with Izuku's chicken. Really? She asks. I didn't know that. Izuku nods, staring down at his food. It's not an official thing, which is why it isn't in the information packets we got. But Lunch Rush is a hero, and he doesn't want anyone going hungry. Plus, UA can afford a few extra meals, so Nezu-sensei doesn't have a problem with it. Izuku remembers the first time around, when Ochako had begun skipping breakfast in order to save money. He remembers the way she'd lagged behind in class, how she'd clutched at her stomach when she thought no one was looking. He remembers how over time she'd grown nauseous from just using her quirk, and how she'd pack away a portion of her lunch every day to take home with her for later. It wasn't long before Aizawa-sensei had noticed and pulled her aside, informing her of the same thing Izuku just had. Izuku remembers that too. The way Ochako had nearly sobbed when she found out. Izuku won't let it get that far this time. Ochako blinks at him before asking, "How do you know all of this stuff?" She cocks her head to the side, staring at him. "Do you know someone who works at UA or something?" "I have been wondering that as well," Tenya says. "You're more informed than I'd expect a first year to be." Izuku smiles at them. "Huh, yeah. I guess I do have some insider information, don't I? I knew some people who attended UA, that's how I know." Ochako's eyes light up in curiosity. "You know people who went to UA?" she asks, delighted. "What year are they? Or have they already graduated? How did you meet them?" Izuku rubs at the back of his head, fingers getting caught in the tangles of his hair. They don't go here anymore." He hedges, looking down so he won't have to stare into Ochako and Tenya's faces as he talks about them in a past life. "They live," Izuku licks his lips, mouth suddenly feeling dry. "They live far away now, so I don't have as much contact with them anymore." No contact. Because even if Izuku had stayed, if he'd never left, if he hadn't jumped back to the past, it wouldn't have changed the fact that half of his friends were long gone anyway. Some days, Izuku longs for and misses his friends so fiercely that he can hardly breathe through the feeling of it clogging up his chest and lodging itself in his throat. But even though Izuku misses them every single day, aches for them every minute, every second sometimes. They are also right here. Ochako, who is bumping elbows with Izuku and nudging his knee with her own, a soft smile on her face. And Tenya, who is watching Izuku like an overworried mother as he not so subtly motions for Izuku to keep it his food. These might not be the older versions of his best friends, but they are still, in every way, Izuku's best friends. "Are these the people who inspired you to become a hero?" Tenya asks. Uraraka-san and I answered that question, but you did not. And I would be lying if I said I wasn't curious. "Oh yeah, me too," Ochako agrees. Izuku shrugs, a light blush pressing at his cheeks. "I always wanted to be a hero, ever since I can remember," he tells them quietly. "But it was my friends that showed me what being a hero truly means. They made me better. They made me the paroled and be where I am without them." Izuku takes in a deep breath, he stares down, fingers distractedly rolling around a few grains of rice that had spilled onto the table. "So, maybe they didn't inspire me to be a hero. But they inspire me to be the very best I can be. They inspired me to fight, to keep going, and to never, ever give up." It takes Izuku a few moments to realize that his declaration has only been met with startled silence. He looks up to see both Tenya and Ochako gaping at him in shock. Tenya looks stunned, his glasses dipping down his nose. Ochako is blinking at him with wide eyes, staring at Izuku like she's never seen him before. "Wow," Ochako starts. "I don't know who your friends are, Izuku-kun," she says, "but they're lucky to ha." She's cut off by the ringing of the alarm, a robotic voice talking over the speakers. "There has been a level 3 security breach. All students please evacuate the premises immediately. I repeat." "An alarm?" Ochako asks, anxiety lacing her voice. "What's going on?" Tenya turns to the upperclassman next to him, asks if this is some kind of drill. Izuku tunes the other boys answer out. The blood in his veins turning to ice as the alarm rings out over his head. Izuku knew it was coming, even if he had been distracted by their conversation. He knew that Shigaraki would be breaking into the school. He'd been counting on it, actually. In order to break into the USJ, first Shigaraki would need their class schedule. This is a necessary evil. Suddenly the scarce amount of rice Izuku had forced down turns to lead in his gut. His stomach rolls, the ringing of the alarm grating on Izuku's ears and brain. He tastes acidic bile at the back of his throat, can feel the building of tremors rattling his very bones. Izuku remembers the last time Shigaraki had been inside of UA. The alarms had sounded then, too. It rang so loudly Izuku could feel it inside his teeth, down into his jaw. And then, suddenly, the power cut out, emergency lights coming on and painting the hallways in flashing red lights. The sudden absence of the alarm had left Izuku unbalanced, his ears ringing. And then he'd heard the screams. Izuku flings himself out of his chair, knee colliding with the table as he stumbles to his feet. The students around him are all panicking, running for the doors in a terrified, frantic frenzy. Izuku is pulled forward by a hand wrapped tightly around his wrist. He just has enough presence of mind to recognize the grip as Ochako's. He stumbles after her, nearly tripping over his own shoes. He feels clumsy and breathless, shaky on his feet. He wonders if Ochako can feel it, the way he's trembling from head to toe. The crowd pushes in all around them, knocking Ochako, Tenya, and Izuku together. Pressing in on all sides, until Tenya's collarbone is digging into the back of Izuku's skull, and Ochako's hair is getting caught in Izuku's mouth. And then someone is stepping on the back of Izuku's heel. He trips forward, nearly falling to the ground. Izuku loses his precarious grip on Ochako, and then she's gone, lost to the sea of students. And Izuku is being knocked to the side, further away from Ochako and Tenya, pushed against the far wall by frantic elbows and shoving knees. Izuku squeezes his eyes shut, but that only seems to amplify the shriek of the alarm overhead and the mass of young, scared voices all around him. Izuku does something notoriously stupid then. He lets himself fall to the floor and unlocks a quirk he doesn't normally use so cavalierly. Permeation lets Izuku slip through the wall and stumble into the connected room. He nearly slams to the floor again when his right leg gets stuck on the other side of the wall. But Izuku hurriedly morphs all the way through the wall, just managing not to leave his sock or shoe behind. He looks up at the bathroom, stupidly thankful that he had been near enough to slip into the room straight from the chaos. And ridiculously grateful that he had enough sense left to remember that there even was a bathroom on the other side of the hallway. Even Nezu's cameras wouldn't have been able to catch Izuku's disappearance within that thick of a crowd, and the bathrooms and locker rooms are the only places in UA free of said cameras. Safe from prying eyes for the moment, Izuku finally lets himself sit, and tremble, and shake, and panic. He's on the bathroom floor, curled up on the ground with the wall digging firmly into the curve of his spine. The blunt edges of his nails cutting into his wrists and the sharp prick of his teeth piercing through his lip. Disjointed memories wash over him, blurring together until Izuku has trouble telling them apart from one another, apart from reality. He's running through the school, his head shrieking with the newly acquired quirk. It leaves Izuku's skin prickling and his hair standing on end, but he knows what it's telling him. Shigaraki is here. Izuku's frozen in place, struggling to breathe. The fingers around his neck curl around the curve of Izuku's throat, cutting off his air. He blinks spots and tears from his eyes. Shigaraki is here. Izuku is soaking wet and gasping, blood and water dripping into his mouth. There's a monster beating Eraserhead into the ground, and a man reaching for Sue's face. Shigaraki is here. Izuku comes back to himself panting and wheezing. The taste of dust and ash filling up his nose and mouth. And then he's choking on it, lurching to his feet to retch up what little food he'd managed to get down. Izuku finishes with a dry heave and then collapses back down to the floor, head spinning and heart thundering in his chest. Izuku sits there, trying to catch his breath. He sits and waits for the shrill scream of the alarm to fade, and the scared shouts of the other students to stop. It takes Izuku far too many minutes to realize that the ringing is only echoing out in his own head. Ochako and Tenya approach Izuku before class. "Are you alright?" Ochako asks Izuku, sitting on his desk so she's looking down at him. "We lost you in the crowd," Ochako goes on. "And we couldn't find you afterwards. I was really worried." Izuku gives her a shaky smile that he hopes is reassuring. "I couldn't find you guys either," he tells them. "So I decided I'd go back to 1A and meet you here." Ochako gives him a softly assessing look, but it's Tenya that says, "We had the same idea." He pauses for a moment, eyes scanning Izuku. "Are you alright, Midoriya-kun?" he asks. "You look rather pale." Izuku gives them a grimace of a smile, waving the question off. "I'm okay," Izuku says, but by the looks on their faces, he can tell his friends don't believe him. Izuku decides to redirect. "I'm just not feeling well," Izuku tells them with an apologetic shrug of his shoulders. "I didn't sleep much last night, and I was a bit nauseous at lunch, as both of you noticed." Izuku can see the way that Ochako reassesses him. Sees the way she attributes the sickliness of his pallor and the way his hands shake on his proclaimed nausea. He can see the way she looks at his sweaty bangs and the redness around his eyes, and links it to being overwhelmed and sleep-deprived. Tenya is quicker to react though, his hand chopping through the air. "If you are feeling ill, I would gladly escort you to Recovery Girl's office," Tenya tells him. He goes on about the importance of sleep before naming off a few home remedies Izuku could try. Izuku smiles and it feels more solid on his face this time. "Thank you," he gently interrupts Tenya. "Thank you both," he turns to Ochako. "But I really am fine, I promise." Does it really count as telling a lie, if you're also lying to yourself? Izuku is on his hands and knees in a puddle of frigid water, gasping for breath and sputtering for air. There's blood dripping into his eyes, and his broken fingers throb with the pounding of his racing heartbeat. Tsunotori Pony is gagging up water at Izuku's side, making a horrible gurgling, choked noise that clicks in her throat and warbles from her mouth. Izuku blinks the blood and water out of his eyes, pressing himself up on wobbly knees. He aims a finger toward the men in front of them, trembling and snow-covered and still gasping for breath. "Asui," he rasps. "Move." Izuku's voice is a thready wisp of sound. But Asui Suyu still hears him anyway. She jumps out of the way, and then Izuku is flicking out one of his fingers. The villains are sent hurtling backward, toward the mountain and away from the three students. Izuku's newly broken finger throbs, but it hardly registers amidst the gut-churning fear encompassing the rest of his body. Izuku is still wheezing for breath. His vision wavers as he climbs to his feet. "We need to go," he tells Asui. "We need to get out of here." "Are you alright, honey?" His mom's voice snaps Izuku away from his thoughts. He jerks upwards, nearly fumbling his chopsticks, his food dropping and bouncing onto his plate. Izuku asks, blinking himself back to the present. His mom is watching him from across the table with a bemused sort of concern. Like she isn't sure if she should be truly worried or just amused. "Oh, did you say something?" Izuku starts, roughly pulling himself back out of his head. He's been drifting and distracted all day, since the moment the emergency alarms echoed throughout the school. Or well, maybe even before that, when Izuku saw the mass of reporters outside the gate and knew that Shigaraki Tamura was amongst them. Izuku shakes his head to himself, forcing himself to focus on the now. The wooden chair beneath his legs. The sound of a news broadcast playing softly in the background. The comforting scent of his mother's homemade cooking. The taste of miso soup still on his tongue. The sight of his childhood home unblemished and stood all around him. "I'm sorry," Izuku says, shifting in his seat and throwing his mom a smile. "I was a bit distracted. What did you say?" His mom gives him an assessing look and then reaches over to pat the back of Izuku's hand. "I just noticed that you looked a bit tired," she says, running her fingers over Izuku's knuckles before pulling away. "Why don't you finish up your food and head onto bed? You look like you could use the extra rest." Izuku nods. "Yeah. I think you're right. He hasn't been sleeping much lately, too distracted by the things to come. The attack on the USJ is tomorrow and Izuku needs to be ready. He has to be prepared for anything. This is his second chance, he refuses to waste it." Izuku forces down the rest of his food and then rises to clear the table. His mom tries to hustle him out of the kitchen, telling him that he's off the hook and to go get some rest. But Izuku inherited his stubbornness from his mother and he knows how to haggle with her. They end up standing side by side, his mom scrubbing the dishes while Izuku dries and puts them away. It's quiet and peaceful and helps to settle Izuku's nerves. The normalcy of it, bumping shoulders with his mom as they silently go about cleaning their kitchen. When everything is put away, Izuku hugs his mom goodnight. "Love you," he tells her, the scent of her eucalyptus shampoo filling up his nose. "Love you too, sweetheart," she says, rubbing her palms over the ridges of Izuku's spine. She's gotten used to his clinginess, the way that Izuku tells her he loves her before he leaves every day and before he goes to bed every night. Izuku knows it had thrown her off at first. Izuku had always been close to his mother, how could he not, when she was the only one who never stopped loving him? But he's sure his abrupt change had confused her. Teenage boys aren't particularly the most openly affectionate with their mothers. And Izuku had gone from acting like every other 14-year-old boy, to well, this, seemingly overnight. But Izuku knows what it is like to regret. "I'm so sorry, Deku," Hawk's voice over the phone, filled with static and pain. Shigaraki. He found them. "I'm so sorry, we tried. But it's all gone. The safe house, the people inside, the street and buildings surrounding. I'm sorry, Deku. It's all gone. One day, the unthinkable can happen. One day, within seconds, she could disappear. One day, Izuku will learn what it is like to be motherless. One day, in a blink of an eye, in an instant, she can be taken away from him too. Like she was nothing, like she didn't matter, like she was never there in the first place. There hadn't even been a body to bury. Izuku has learned over and over again about the precious fragility, the delicate breakability, of life. It is a finite thing, and one that can be taken away with a single touch of menacing fingertips. Good night, Izuku tells his mama, pulling away from the hug and heading toward his room. I'll see you tomorrow. He hopes it isn't a lie. Hopes that the USJ goes according to plan. Hopes that things will end differently this time. He hopes. Come on, we're almost there, Izuku urges. Tsunotori sprawled out on his back while Izuku drags Asui behind him, her footsteps getting heavier and heavier as she begins to succumb to the snow around them. She can't move well in the cold, she'd told Tsunotori and Izuku when they first landed in the blizzard zone. She'll get weaker and more lethargic the longer they're out here. Until she won't be able to move at all, falling under the effects of hibernation. Asui, Sue, Izuku pleads, blood dripping from his hair and heart pounding behind his eyes. He's hurt. They're all hurt. Izuku isn't sure if he'll be able to carry the three of them out of here by himself. Hold on just a little longer, he says, voice still ragged from nearly drowning. We're almost out, I promise. Izuku trudges into 1A with the exhaustion heavy in his bones and caffeine buzzing through his veins. He tries not to rely too heavily on caffeine on a regular basis, but Izuku thinks he gets a free pass on this one. He didn't sleep much last night, and Izuku has a very busy day ahead of him. Midoriya. Tenya snaps out of his seat when Izuku trudges into the classroom. Food and drinks are prohibited outside of the mess hall. Please dispose of your drinks before entering the classroom. Izuku tiredly takes another sip of his coffee, blinking up at Tenya. He'd almost forgotten how strictly his friend used to abide by the rules. How he'd followed them to the letter, never wanting to stray over those drawn lines. Not that Tenya ever stopped obeying rules, he just mellowed over time. Or perhaps that isn't quite it either. Maybe it wasn't that Tenya relaxed beneath the laws, but that he adapted and changed when he recognized that not all laws should be followed. Less of a softening of his beliefs and more of an understanding that in the place of war and chaos, laws and rules no longer protect and guide society the way they should. It's kind of funny, watching Tenya get so flustered over something as minute as coffee in the classroom. Good morning, Iida-kun, Izuku says, smiling up at the other boy. It's all right. Aizawa-sensei won't mind, he says, edging around Tenya so he can get to his desk. I wouldn't normally say this, but I agree with Iida-kun. Mina pipes up from her own seat. Aizawa-sensei doesn't seem like the type to let us get away with that. Izuku shrugs off his yellow backpack and hangs it on the back of his chair. He won't mind as long as he gets a cup of coffee out of it, he mumbles, grabbing the second cup with a tendril of black whip in the middle of Aizawa-sensei's desk at the front of the room. Tenya watches on, gaping down at Izuku. Are you trying to bribe our teacher? Tenya chokes, completely mortified by the idea. Izuku slumps down into his chair, waving off the question with a flick of his fingers. No, Iida-kun. Nothing so conspiring. I wanted a coffee and I figured that Aizawa-sensei would appreciate one also. It was only fair, Izuku had thought while buying the coffees. Aizawa-sensei will be dealing with the fallout at the USJ as much as Izuku will be. But unlike Izuku, Aizawa does not have the forewarning ahead of time to prepare himself for the attack. If anyone needs coffee as much as Izuku does today, then it is Aizawa-sensei. Tenya doesn't seem to have an argument for that, and he drifts back to his seat as the rest of 1A falls into quiet chatter around them. Izuku spots Ochako slipping into class a few minutes before the bell, looking brighter than she had yesterday. Good, she'd gone to lunch rush for breakfast then. Izuku trades a small smile and wave with Ochako, and then he goes back to sipping at his coffee and staring at his desk. Izuku lets the voices of his classmates wash over him, focusing more on the sounds of them rather than the words actually being said. Izuku feels far away from this moment, distant and drifting. He knows what is waiting for them, what evil is lurking in the shadows. It's been in his head on replay for days, has been haunting his waking thoughts and plaguing his sleeping moments. The attack. The disaster. The tragedy. It's coming, they're coming, Shigaraki is coming. Izuku has been waiting for this day as much as he has been dreading it. He's depending on this, he's terrified of it. He needs this, but he has never wanted it. The USJ is today. Izuku has been waiting for this for nearly a year. This is the day that Izuku brings Shigaraki Tamura to the ground. The day that Izuku finally gets to make things right. The day that Izuku's secrets will be revealed. And that's a bit terrifying too. Because if everything goes according to plan, if things go well, then Izuku will have so much explaining to do. Aizawa-sensei enters the room moments before the bell rings, looking as tired and run down as Izuku feels. Glad everyone has found their seats, he deadpans, which is Aizawa-sensei's way of telling them he knows most of the class had only scrambled to their seats seconds before he entered. Today's heroics lesson will be a bit different, Aizawa goes on, walking over to his desk before pausing. Aizawa-sensei's gaze lands on the to-go cup sat on his desk, and then it drifts upward toward the sitting students. Aizawa-sensei's eyes immediately land on the matching to-go cup in Izuku's hand. The rest of 1A seem to hold their breath as they wait for Aizawa-sensei's reaction. Izuku just raises his cup toward Aizawa-sensei, a silent toast of sorts, before he takes a swig. Aizawa-sensei picks up his own cup and does the same, turning back to the class like the moment hadn't even happened. Today's lesson plan has been altered slightly, Aizawa-sensei repeats. You'll have 3 instructors. Myself and 2 other pros will be going over some basic rescue training. No matter what you specialize in as a hero, there will come a time when you have to deal with disasters. Whether those be natural disasters or man-made ones. Aizawa-sensei takes another long pull of his drink, his eyes sliding closed for a moment, like he's just taken a drag from a cigarette, not a sip of coffee. Are there any questions? Are there going to be 3 of you because of yesterday's break-in? Hagakure asks. What kinds of disasters will we be dealing with today? Hanta asks. Having 3 pros is both to keep a better eye on you all, and to give you differing perspectives on dealing with disasters, Aizawa-sensei says. And you will find out the details soon enough. For now, get dressed. Aizawa-sensei takes his coffee and trudges for the door. PE clothes or hero costumes, it's up to you. We'll be off campus for this one. Gather at the bus lot. Everyone scrambles to their feet, grabbing their costumes and excitedly chattering about their rescue training. Izuku sucks down the last of his coffee and follows behind, grabbing his own suitcase. It's time. Tsunotori Pony's breaths are wrecked and fragile sounding, a horrible rasp coming straight from her lungs. She'd been in that bubble of water a lot longer than Izuku had. She'd nearly drowned before Asui was able to locate the villain responsible. A blast of warm air hits them when they finally exit the blizzard zone, and it only seems to make Izuku shiver harder. He stumbles, nearly losing his grip on Tsunotori in the process. They're both dripping wet and covered in sleet and ice. Izuku can hardly feel his fingers, he's sure Tsunotori's are the same. But it is Asui who Izuku is really worried about. Asui? He asks, turning toward her. I'm okay, she croaks. Getting warmer already. We need to find the others. We need to find Aizawa-sensei or 13-sensei. Izuku nods, looking out toward the entrance of the USJ, where they had been ambushed in the first place. He doesn't know what would be smarter, to hide this out or to look for help. They need medical attention, Tsunotori-chan most of all. But they're still under attack and Izuku doesn't know if anyone at UA has noticed anything amiss at all. How long until someone notices? How long until they are rescued? How long until their luck runs out? Okay. Izuku shivers, looking toward Asui as fear and determination clench around his ribs. Here's the plan. The entire bus ride to the USJ, Izuku silently goes over his plan. If things go like they had the first time around, then the villains will warp in almost on top of them, surrounding the students before scattering them throughout the facility. Izuku may be able to stop that from happening this time if he's fast enough. He'll prioritize taking Kurogiri down, keeping the students in one place as well as eliminating Shigaraki's escape route. Once that's done though, Izuku will have to make some choices. He knows that his classmates will be able to hold their own against the street-level thugs, especially if Eraserhead and 13 aren't separated and are still there to protect them. But Shigaraki isn't above taking hostages, and Izuku knows he also isn't opposed to killing children. So either Shigaraki will attack the students himself, or he'll have his Nomu do it for him. Izuku will have to fight accordingly and just hope that Aizawa-sensei and 13-sensei are able to hold off one of them long enough for Izuku to deal with the other. Izuku isn't going to have the luxury or time to get his classmates away from the fight, but he can at least protect them from the worst of it. Shigaraki isn't at his full power at this point in time. He'll be quick work once Izuku can get to him. It's the Nomu that Izuku will have to worry about. He'll need to lead it away from the rest of 1A so they aren't caught up in that fight or worse. Plan A is to go on the offensive, hit Kurogiri and Shigaraki before they can even see it coming. They think they have the element of surprise, but it is Izuku who truly holds that power. He needs to be smart and use that to his advantage. And if worse comes to worse, then Izuku will move on to Plan B, go on the defensive, protect his classmates. Having to use certain quirks like Shelter or Siphon will drain Izuku's reserves faster. But if he has to choose between himself getting hurt in the fight or his classmates potentially dying, well, that isn't a choice at all. Izuku squeezes his hands into fists on his lap, hidden within the sanctuary of his hood and mask, where his teacher and classmates can't see him strategizing and agonizing and remembering. Everyone quiet. Dao's voice jolts Izuku from his thoughts, like a rubber band snapping back into place. We're here. The rest of the bus quiets at Aizawa's chiding, and Izuku is left tense and thrumming with energy. He squeezes his hands together so tightly he swears he feels the ache of past wounds and old injuries. But those are just phantom pains now. Izuku's hands are as unblemished and scar-free as the rest of him. The stories of broken bones and hard fights no longer written along his skin. He's a blank slate now, in everything but mind. The class piles off the bus and Izuku follows along on nothing more than autopilot. His feet numbly carrying him forward, his legs stiff and tense beneath him. The class follows the two pros into the USJ and Izuku makes sure to place himself toward the front, where he will be able to jump forward and intervene the fastest. He knows he'll have to take 13 and Aizawa-sensei into account. They both think he is an untrained student. Aizawa-sensei will probably try to apprehend Izuku before he can engage with the villains. He'll view Izuku as a reckless and idiotic child and act accordingly. Izuku will have to be quicker than all of them. He won't hesitate, because hesitation will get him killed, or worse, it will get others killed. The faster Izuku gets out of his teacher's reach, the better. Their focus needs to be on the rest of 1A, not Izuku. Neither of the pros know it, but Izuku is trusting them to defend the rest of the class, to keep them safe. If they can do that, if they can protect the children, then Izuku can focus on the rest, on what needs to be done. Izuku doesn't hear 13's speech, their voice fading to the background as Izuku stands stiff and still, waiting for danger sense to go off, for a swirling portal of vapors to open up right in front of them. His eyes scanning for any sort of movement, for any change at all. Izuku's heart is pounding, his brain filled with static. He's ready. He's ready. He's so incredibly ready. Izuku-kun? Ochako's voice whispers from Izuku's left. Are you alright? You seem kind of tense. Izuku makes a valiant effort to lower his shoulders, to unclench his fists and jaw, to relax his posture as much as he possibly can. He had almost forgotten how perceptive Ochako is. He's a little surprised that she's already able to read him so well. But well, Ochako has always been amazing. I'm fine, Izuku whispers back, injecting a lightness into his tone that he does not feel, just lost in thought. Ochako gives him a nod, but Izuku can tell she doesn't fully believe him. But without knowing what is wrong, and without being able to see Izuku's face, she doesn't have much room to push. 13 finishes off explaining their quirk and the dangers that are involved, and the class is as awestruck as they'd been the first time, all murmuring excitedly, ready for today's rescue training. Izuku hardly hears any of it, eyes fixed on the fountain in front of them, heart pounding in his ears. Hey, Eijiro's voice calls out from Izuku's right, his hand shooting up. I thought Aizawa-sensei said there was supposed to be 3 teachers today. He asks, so who's the third? Aizawa-sensei is the one to answer that, waving a dismissive hand as he says, running a bit late. He'll be joining us soon. For now, let's get started. Izuku tenses up, planting his feet. Any second now, and they will be surrounded on all sides. Any second now, and danger sense will slice across his brain. Any second now, and Shigaraki will be here. Aizawa's sensei and 13 begin down the stairs, the rest of the class trailing after them. Izuku's steps stutter as he forces himself to follow behind, his body coiled tight like a spring, almost too stiff for him to move. This hadn't happened last time. The villains had already shown up by now. This hadn't happened last time. Izuku's skin is buzzing, his ears ringing. He knows some of his classmates have noticed his odd behavior. But Izuku can't find it in himself to care. His chest is too tight, his hands going tingly and numb beneath his gloves. Where are they? Where are they? Where are they? Today we will be focusing on rescuing civilians from dangerous areas and how to provide basic first aid while out in the field, Aizawa's sensei says, leading the class toward the wind zone. It's easy to use your quirks to cause harm or to fight villains, 13 pitches in. It's much harder to use them in a gentle and non-destructive way. Some of you will have to think outside of the box in situations like these. They walk past the fountain, through the plaza, and nothing happens. Nothing happens. They're edging around the plaza, so close to the main exit, so incredibly close to freedom, when Izuku hears it. The crunch of bone and a cut-off scream. That's when Izuku sees it. A creature like he's never seen before. He doesn't know if it is human, if it ever was, or if it is something else entirely. Eye bulging from its skull. Beak lined with needle-sharp teeth, brain bare and pulsating for all to see. Aizawa's sensei is pinned beneath the monster. Limbs twisted at odd, jagged angles. Blood dripping over his face and from his eyes. Unable to move as a villain reaches out and sweeps his fingers over Aizawa's sensei's arm. Aizawa's sensei screams again. This time it is a broken croaked noise, and Izuku doesn't think he will ever be able to get the sound of it out of his head. Izuku or Asui must make a sound. One of them must. Because one moment the hulking monster, the one who'd been beating Aizawa's sensei into the ground. The one who'd broken Eraserhead's arms like twigs. The one who has splatters of their teacher's blood staining its hands. Red. 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 So much red. One moment, the monster is across the plaza. And then next, it is right in front of them. The windstorm zone is a hurricane of icy rain and roaring wind. The noise of it is almost enough to drown out the shrieking in Izuku's brain. But he can still hear it like a pulsating siren echoing out between his ears. This shouldn't be happening, they shouldn't be here. This is wrong. We have placed civilian decoys around this zone, Aizawa's sensei tells them, sweeping a hand out toward the mock city. The high-speed wind and rain will make rescuing them harder. Your job is to locate the civilians and evacuate them as quickly and safely as possible. 13 holds up a finger then, grabbing the student's attention. Some of the decoys will have mock injuries, they say. So you'll need to assess whether or not to move them, and if so, how to do so without injuring them further. Denki's hand shoots up. How will we know if they're injured? I mean, they're gonna be test dummies or robots, right? He asks. How are we supposed to know if they're safe to move or not? Izuku hears the dull drone of Aizawa's voice in the background, answering Denki's question. But the roar in his head has mixed with the roar of the storm, and Izuku can't make out what's being said. His mouth has gone unbearably dry, every inhale clicking in his throat, and every exhale whistling from his lips. Izuku feels lightheaded, dizzy, breathless. Like all of the air has been stolen away to be used in the artificial storm raging all around them. Like there is no air left at all. Izuku drops Tsunotori to the ground as softly as he can manage. Jumping in front of her and Asui to shield them away from the monster towering over them. Izuku calls one for all to him, and it answers. The power thrums through him, and then Izuku is slamming his fist into the monster with 100% of his power. Somehow, his arm doesn't break. Izuku is left reeling and shocked for one startling moment, looking down at his unaffected arm in surprise. And then Izuku realizes he wasn't the only one unaffected. You will be separated into 5 teams, Aizawa tells them, S face hidden beneath his scarf. Hiding from the wind even as it whips at his hair. 4 teams of 4 and 1 team of 3. Come pick your lots and see whose team you'll be joining today, 13 says, holding up a large glass bowl filled with different colored bands. Izuku doesn't know how he ends up in line to grab his own team assignment. Maybe someone dragged him into line, maybe he even did it himself. He doesn't know. Doesn't care. The monster moves so fast Izuku doesn't know what is happening until he is being slammed to the pavement. He's pinned down, cracked concrete piercing into Izuku's back, air knocked straight from his lungs, blood seeping through his hair. Izuku struggles and wriggles beneath the monster, but it only presses down harder, its taloned feet wrapped around Izuku's arms, its weight grinding Izuku's bones together. Izuku wheezes for breath, blinking spots from his eyes, ears ringing from the impact. But even still, Izuku pulls back his leg and lets one for all fill up his limbs. And then Izuku slams his knee into the monster's back, right where its spine should be. Nothing, it's like Izuku hadn't landed a hit at all. And then the monster reaches down for Izuku's leg. Team Orange? Ojiro asks as he and Kyoka walk up to Izuku, holding up their own armbands. Izuku forces himself to nod. He isn't sure he could speak even if he wanted to. It's all he can do to keep himself from shaking apart. Black Whip is thrumming under his skin, as distressed as Izuku feels. They aren't coming. Somewhere along the way, something changed. Ojiro rubs at the back of his head, looking uncomfortable. So we have the east corner. Should we split into pairs and meet in the middle? Kyoka shrugs, giving Izuku a long look before addressing Ojiro. I think maybe we should find our fourth teammate before we start planning. Right, Ojiro says, twisting around to find their last team member. I'll go look. Hopefully we aren't the team of three. Everything, all of Izuku's meticulous planning, his year of strategizing and preparing. Izuku thought he had the upper hand this entire time. He'd been counting on it, the element of surprise. The fact that he had years and years worth of knowledge on Shigaraki and the League to put him ahead of them. Izuku has been plotting, and training, and thinking about this day non-stop, near constantly, in his waking and sleeping hours. And even still, somewhere down the line, Izuku miscalculated. Somewhere along the way, he'd slipped up. Even with all the odds stacked in Izuku's favor, somehow, Shigaraki had still gotten the better of him. Somehow, Izuku still managed to fail. Still pinned beneath the monster's hulking weight, Izuku struggles against the feet pinning his arms down, but it's no use. The monster wraps its massive hand around Izuku's leg, and with a flick of its wrist, a twitch of its fingers, Izuku's leg snaps beneath its palm. Izuku lets out a blood-curdling scream as his kneecap is shattered, his leg falling limply to the ground when the monster drops it. Izuku can hardly breathe around the pain, he pants and gasps and sobs through it. Blinking tears and blood out of his vision to stare up at the monster above him, looking death straight in the eye. I was going to kill Eraserhead, a raspy voice says, footsteps approaching from Izuku's left. But this will be better, a man purrs. A lone red eye peering at Izuku through the severed hand obscuring his face. What a blow this will be, the villain murmurs, almost a whisper in Izuku's ear. He reaches out to Izuku's tear-streaked face, fingers splayed out toward Izuku, failing to protect the children. And then there is a flash of green, and Izuku can do nothing but watch, as Tsuyu Asui and the villain go sprawling to the ground. Midoriya-kun? Kyoka's hesitant voice breaks Izuku out of his thoughts. Are you alright? Izuku's stomach roils, his eyes burning, his head pounding. He thinks he might be shaking, but he can't tell. His body feels numb and distant from him, as far away as Kyoka and the rest of the class seem to be. Izuku knows that he needs to say something, needs to feign sickness or nervousness or something else entirely. Because Kyoka can surely hear the racing of his heart and the stuttering of his breaths as loudly as Izuku can. Here we are, Ojiro's voice breaks in before Izuku has to answer. Looks like Todoroki-kun is our fourth, he says, Shoto trailing behind him. Their approach saves Izuku from having to come up with an excuse. But he doesn't miss the way that Kyoka continues to glance at him, concern and worry pinching at the contours of her face. Izuku stares straight ahead and pretends not to notice. Tsuyu rolls to her feet, trying to dodge under the outstretched fingers coming for her face. But she is still lethargic and slow from being in the blizzard zone for so long. If she was in her normal state, if she wasn't already hurt, if this was any other time but this one, she would have gotten away. But it is not any other time, this is now. And Izuku can do nothing but watch, helpless and gasping for air, still pinned beneath the creature above him, leg broken and still bleeding. As the villain's hand comes up to cup around Suyu's cheek, one deceptively gentle touch, a deadly caress of pale fingers. Asui Suyu's frightened expression is frozen in place on her face. That wide-eyed terror that had overtaken her features when she understood what was going to happen. When she realized she was about to die. Sue's horror-filled face is there one moment, and then it's crumbling to ash the next. Now, Aizawa-sensei calls, clapping his hands together to get everyone's attention. Let's begin. You will have approximately 25 minutes to. Hello, everyone, I am here. A gut-wrenchingly familiar voice calls out from behind them all. I apologize for my tardiness. But I had some urgent matters to attend to. All Might. Oh my god. I didn't know All Might was going to be here. This is so cool. Izuku feels himself freeze, one for all buzzing beneath his skin, the rest of him screaming. He turns around, heart thundering in his chest, and there he is. All Might is here. Toshinori is here. Toshinori is finally here. Izuku watches in petrified horror as Sue's body begins to crack open, as her face caves in on itself and turns to dust, as she disintegrates right in front of him. The villain laughs and laughs and laughs, and Izuku can't take his eyes off of the place Asui's body should be. There's a reverberating bang of sound throughout the USJ, a familiar voice calling out to them all. And then the monster is being ripped off of Izuku. And All Might is protectively standing over him. All Might is here. All Might is finally here. But it's already too late. Asui is gone, she's gone.